takes just a few days to make whiskey in a distillery, but it takes years to mature it in a warehouse. So isn't it time we gave up a vPub to talk about the magic of the cask? I'll see you in a minute. Hello, whiskey folk. Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another vPub. Welcome to another Thursday night. Just a pocket of time to hang out, relax for a little while, raise a dram if you can, and spend a little bit of time celebrating whiskey. Tonight's topic, I think, could be one of those topics that we spend multiple vPubs talking about, honestly speaking. If we talk about casks, the magic of the cask, and all the different intricacies and complications therein, we could end up down rabbit holes forever and a day. But tonight we're just going to kind of lightly touch on a broad range of topics revolving around that magical serendipitous thing that's come to help us enjoy whiskey so much. That is an oak vessel to mature it in. It's quite incredible how we worked out that barley was as magical as it was, and that fermenting that into some kind of beer and then distilling it incidentally through copper was also magical too, and that interaction between copper and the spirit. And then, of course, that going into some kind of container to store it once it's made. And incidentally, the oak was at hand, and it turned out that we worked out that oak was the most magical thing, and it did have a significant impact on how we enjoyed the whiskey. So that's the kind of things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about different kinds of oak. We're going to talk about the previous incumbents. We're going to talk about how it's managed, how it's used to enhance the whiskey, all the difficulties and complexities that come in there. But more than anything, I'm going to ask you guys to chime in with your questions as I invite my guest in to support me on this topic tonight. It's not something I can talk about myself. I wanted to reach out to somebody who had their hand in distilling, making the spirit, and then significantly for tonight's discussion, managing the maturation of that spirit in oak casks. So I'm looking forward to welcoming in Director of Distilling at Tomatin, Graham Eunson, a wee bit later in a few minutes. In the meantime, if you're trying to get my attention, you know how to do that. Just write Aquavitae and it should highlight in orange for me to see. If you're watching this on the replay, I am very, very grateful. Thank you so much for picking it up on the replay. It's wonderful. I hope that I have been good and I have had time after tonight's stream to go along, scrub through and put some timestamps in the description box below to help you navigate your way through the stream if you're interested in going straight to the things that you're interested in. I will attempt to do that after the live tonight. But if you're here live, thank you so much, especially if you're watching here in the lounge and YouTube, but you may also be tuning in from Facebook. The comments that I'm interacting with tonight and the people that I'm speaking to are in the lounge and YouTube. So don't think I'm ignoring you. I don't get to the Facebook comments probably until a wee bit later. My friend in the States over in Vegas, I think, James Bricker is saying, going to meet my new goddaughter tonight, Roy. Should I take her a 21-year-old Glenfarclas or a Glengoyne? Miss you, Roy. Come back to the States soon. I'm missing everybody, James, and I'm missing my annual excursion over to the States as well. It'll happen again soon, my friend. My recommendation, take both and let your goddaughter choose. And can't it be both, James, honestly? Anyway, thanks for your virtual drama, friend. It's nice to welcome you in, James. I hope you're doing well. And here's to your goddaughter. Cheers. Only poured a tiny little amount of that tonight. And I'm really enjoying it. I'll share with you what it is in a moment or two, but I uncorked this on our very, very recent vPub. So let's jump into the lounge and welcome some beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies. Who do we have in this evening? Kino got Charlie. So good to see you. I've been thinking about you. Hope you're keeping well. I hope you're doing well. She's asking us, Slancha, hope all is well. We're mostly doing pretty well, Charlie, and we raise a wee glass and hope that you are too. Wonderful to welcome you back in. Charlie over in Norway. Whiskey Games is in, that's Matt Bishop in Scotland, Helen down in England. Good to see you in, Helen. Good to see you in, Matt. Brood is here, evening from the borders. Wonderful to welcome you in. I bet it's cold and blowy down in the borders, just like it is here. Perhaps a bit damp too. Ryan Sutherland is in. Wonderful to see you, Ryan. Fantastic. And Gino, good to have you in, Gino, from my friend from Canada. Molasses is here as well as Peter Box. Good to see you guys. Kresimir, the Sniper King, is here. That looks like a new name. Insane good, everyone from Heng Chung. Heng Chung, very nice to welcome you, my friend. Good to have you in. Polyester Landscape is here. Wonderful stuff. Good to see you. Always nice to welcome you in, as well as my friend Jim Jensen over in the States, Jimmy Jazz. Graham Young, that's Gino's friend from Canada. Graham Young, one of our front line healthcare workers too. I raise a glass to you, Graham, and nice to welcome you in, my friend. Cheers. Jimmy Legg is here. Jean de la Cuisine. Drew from Arizona. Good to see you guys. Richie Z. Richie, always great to see you. Lee J. Brown is in. Bogdan Rinsky is in, or Rilski? Rilski. Let's go with that. Bogdan Rilski. It looks like a new name. Fantastic to welcome you in, my friend, and I hope I've not butchered your name. Graham Fraser is here. Good to have you, Graham. Always Scotch on the Bayou. Leanne, wonderful stuff. Whiskey Julian, that looks like a new name as well. Evening Aquaviti, highlight of the Whiskey Week. It's a highlight of the Whiskey Week for me too, Julian. Excellent to welcome you in, my friend. I hope you're doing well. Pull up a bar stool, tell us where you are, what you're sipping, and what you're all about. Fantastic. Greg's Whiskey Guide from France. Malt Mondays is in as well. Great to see you, Malt Mondays. Wonderful to welcome you in as always. Aquaviti Roy, I'm glad I can join tonight. It's always nice when the timing works out, my friend. McAllen Fine and Rare, the doc, looking after me tonight. He's cast a steely eye over tonight's quiz at the end, and he's given it his rating. He's decided what he predicts the lounge will score for the quiz at the end tonight. I think he's decided it's somewhere close to crunchy, but I'll share more with that. More of that with you a wee bit later. The quiz always goes out at the very end, so it's just the people that want to participate that hang around for it. Bud Jenkins is here as well. Great to see you, Bud. Dribs and Drams, good to see you too. Oh, I thought I could maybe remember your name. I'm going to guess that it's Jesse. Dribs and Drams, is it Jesse? Wonderful to welcome you, my friend. Spirit Bomb, Red Mordecai. First Phil Whiskey, fantastic Phil. So good to see you, my friend. Fantastic content coming out from you down in New Zealand there, and it's great to welcome you in. I know it's early in the morning for you. You're probably sitting with a cup of coffee. You're maybe even at work. Jerry Miller is here. Falsgraf. So many of you in, over 300 of you hanging out to chat about the magic of the cask. I'll tell you what's in my glass. I've got something that I came to love over the course of a year or so because a friend bought a bottle. I didn't. I bought one of the first ever releases. I doubted myself and thought that maybe it was the Revival that I bought, the Glenglassaugh Revival, but I'm pretty sure it was the Evolution. No, it wasn't. It was the Revival. It was the Revival I bought, and it was very young and spirity. And of course, if you look at when Glenglassaugh was shuttered, when it was mothballed, it had to be pretty young, spirity stuff. It was a while before I went back again, but I got to love a bottle of Glenglassaugh Evolution with a friend of mine, Craig Dollier, who's often in. And it took me a long time. I should have probably invested in this whiskey before now, because I'm certainly enjoying this tonight. It's still spirit-led. It's still spirit-forward, I would say. Still quite young, but it's beautifully clean, and there's a nice depth and richness and creaminess coming into it now. And I think that makes sense because as Glenglashaugh's open longer and longer, they've got a deeper stock to draw from, I guess, to vat, to marry together for these non-age statement releases. Other than the fact it doesn't have a non-age statement, it's fantastically well presented, 50% ABV, wonderful stuff. And it does say that it's non-chill filtered and bottled at natural colour. It says it on the label. It's not in big letters across the front. It's fine. It's just for us, the enthusiasts, to know that they've written it on the label somewhere on the back. The reason I've started with this tonight is this. We know this to be from one cask only. This is matured in ex-bourbon casks. That's what the Evolution is. And you could probably nose and taste this blind. And even as a kind of relatively amateur whiskey lover, whiskey enthusiast, you could probably easily pick that out. The spirit is the most forward thing on the nose. So there's a nice kind of malty, slightly sweet, sugary confectionery note. But quite quickly, you can dig into some of the cask notes that are in here. A wee tiny bit of coconut, a wee bit of lemon, vanilla definitely. Typical things that you would expect to find in a bourbon cask. Now, in the past, we've talked about the flavour chase. We've talked about spirit versus cask. There's been various subjects in the vPub where we've talked about how the cask influences flavour. And we'll obviously slip into that discussion tonight a wee bit, but I wanted tonight to focus on some of the misconceptions about casks, some of the intricacies about casks that we want to understand perhaps a wee bit more of, how the casks come to be, what's the difference between one cask and another cask, what do these terms mean when we talk about casks, terms like Re-char or De-char and Re-char or STR. What about terms like first fill and refill? What does a refill actually mean? How can things like a sherry hogshead come to be? And how is that made up? How has that come to be in existence? A hogshead that's previously contained sherry. How are all of these things managed? What's the differences between them? How is it that you can put two identical casks filled at the exact same time, at the same spot in the warehouse for the same amount of time, and have two completely different results, often, sometimes? Things like this, that's what I'd like to try and explore tonight. So as I go through and chat about these topics with my guest tonight, please try and grab my attention. I know it's tricky, but if you're typing aqua vitae and you're spelling it correctly with that V instead of a U, I know it's pesky and frustrating for you, I will see it lit up in orange. I'm just looking to my right and seeing Whiskey in the Six, Rob, and from Canada as well, you star. Nice to have you in, and wonderful to see you managing to encourage Ralphie onto your podcast. I'm going to drop the link for that in later in the stream. There's a wee question tonight that's going to pop into the quiz talking about that, Rob. So hopefully my moderators, my support here tonight will remind me to drop that link to that podcast in. And if you're watching this on the replay, hopefully I've remembered to put the link to that podcast in the description box below as well. Go over and spend an hour or so hanging out with Jeremy, Rob, and Ralphie on the Whiskey Rant podcast. A real treat. Excellent stuff. Craig Dollar is saying, I loved the Glenglassaugh evolution, but it's finished now. We know we got through it. And thank you for bringing it to me, because it was one of the whiskies that I featured in my Ignored series. Because it was one that I'd kind of connected with a wee bit and then decided no, and it needed a friend. Just like the Stefan Novak Glenturret sample, things like that. Things to give you that wee nudge to get you to explore and discover these kind of really, really interesting and enjoyable whiskies. Skogsmard is here, good to see you, saying I was thinking of entering as a Speyside, but the bottle I wanted to use is apparently a Sweden exclusive offering called Moina, a Nas from Bunnahaven. I thought it was core. It's everywhere here. Moina is actually their peated release. Now, there are different expressions of Moina, and there are different names for Bunnahaven peated whiskies, honestly. But generally, no, Skogsmard, if you wanted to enter with that, I'd be happy for you to do that. Give me your details, and it should be easy for me to guess what you're going. But honestly, if it's something like that, I recognise the Moina from Bunnahaven. I would have let that fly. And it's always a bit of fun, isn't it? It's not about winning or losing. It's to get some interaction in the lounge, for folk to get their hands on these exclusive glass toppers, these sniper coins, so that they can guess along. It looks like the Rock Gut review is in. I haven't spotted them, but somebody's talking to them. Rock Gut review is in. I hope that's Ed and Erica from the States, one of the funniest whiskey channels. If you take your whiskey seriously, don't go over and visit the Rock Gut review. For everything that they do that is genuinely serious, they do 2 or 3 things that are heavily, heavily tongue-in-cheek. If you ever want to laugh and you don't take things too seriously, a wee bit of satire, my favourite things that they do is their series on how to pretend that you like. And they have Scotch, and they have bourbon, and they have Irish, Japanese, all of these. That's a series of whiskies. If you're offended by bad language, I don't recommend it. But if you're relaxed and comfortable with all that and you enjoy a belly laugh, go and check out the Rock Gut review. Brandon Rodriguez has bought me a dram. Fantastic, Brandon. Thank you so much. Where has it gone? Big fan of the channel, he's saying. Thank you so much. He's saying these vPubs never disappoint. Enjoying some Altmore 12 over here in New Jersey tonight. New Jersey. I have visited New Jersey. There's a Scottish town in New Jersey called Carney, and one of the community lives in Carney, New Jersey. And I say a Scottish town, obviously, but it's a town, obviously, with a huge Scottish community. And there was a bizarre kind of feeling of being home when I was in Carney, New Jersey. They were selling iron brew and Scotch pies and Scotch food and Scotch confectionery, Scottish confectionery. It was really, really fun. Brandon, it's wonderful to welcome you in, and I'm glad you're enjoying the channel. Cheers, my friend, and thanks for the dram. Whiskey Wookie's here is saying, what a great name, Whiskey Wookie. Good evening, sir. Glad I can actually catch it live for a change. I'm very glad that I can welcome you in as well, and it's good that I spotted you here too. Michael Fenrir Doc is saying, remind you, I'm an old man, even older than you. Okay, but you're a cannier mind than me, whereas I'm scattergun, you're very focused. It's nice to have you, buddy. Whiskey Rev is in. Never had the evolution. Keep some. There's Rev. The next time that you're in this house, your eyes are going to roll out of your wee head. The days of us sitting around the dining table or a breakfast bar together, sipping whiskey and having maybe a couple of 3-4 dozen bottles to choose from, we're going to be spoiled for choice, and there will no doubt be some Glenglassaugh evolution waiting here for you. Good to have you in, buddy. Jean Della Cuisine is saying, I watched the last vPub on replay and it made my wish list quite a bit longer. Sometimes that's a problem, but there's going to be a vPub coming up in the very near future to give us wee tips and tricks of how to tackle that. Never rush. The whiskey's always going to be there. And if you miss it this time, there's more whiskey, and there's just always going to be whiskey, Jean Della Cuisine. Not one day's saying we need to discuss Anok. I'm 100% sure you're wrong about that one. No, I would say no. You can't be wrong about whiskey. That's the thing, John, is that if I connect with Anok generally across the range. The 12-year-old, I think, is what you're referring to, is it presented at 40%, so it can be a wee bit soft. But the Anok family thing is still intact here. That it's a completely different and unique 12-year-old to all the other offerings that are out there. It's dry, minerally, lovely and floral. I don't deny that, yes, it's a wee bit light, but not every whiskey has to be full on and flavoursome all the time. Anok is a good, solid 12-year-old, and I like it very much. If you haven't connected with it yet, that's okay. You don't need to connect with it. But never say, I don't like this. Because one day, somebody's going to pour it for you blind, and you're going to say, this is wonderful, and work out that it's something you've previously declared you don't like. But I get you, not everybody has to like everything. Anthony Dunn is saying, hi, Roy, lovely to spend a Thursday with you, having a Deanston 12 in front of a roaring fire and watch the vPub. A great way to spend the lockdown. Sounds amazing, Anthony. Thank you very much for my drama friend over there in Ireland. Cheers to you. I think you're in Ireland, Northern Ireland. I think so. James bought me another dram. He's saying, moved from Vegas to Denver, but found a new super chocolate single malt from the mountains that I need to get to you from Deerhammer. Sounds amazing. In Denver, I don't think I've had a Denver whiskey of any style, thinking about it. Graham Horner, Whiskey Works. Graham, I think you're also Northern Ireland. Bought me a dram saying, just jumping on quickly. Early start tomorrow, figuring out stuff for a house move. We'll catch on the replay, even if I'm boxing things as I do it. Graham, it's wonderful to welcome you, my friend, and it's great that you'll pick it up on the replay. Hopefully, I'll help you navigate things with the timestamps as well. Great to have you, Graham. Cheers to you. And Greg's Whiskey Guide is saying, yep, blind tasting aquavitae is often what we call here the judge of peace, the ultimate judge. I'm obsessed with it. Obsessed with it, Greg. I absolutely adore it. So let's talk about the subject tonight. We're at 10:05 already. It's quite amazing that I haven't spent more time talking about casks on the vPub. As I opened up there at the start of the live stream, we talk about just a few days it takes to make whiskey for that new make to pour off the still. That's just a few days start to finish. But until that whiskey goes into the bottle, it can be years and years and years in a wooden cask, a parent to the child almost. We've talked about sherry casks. There's an upcoming vPub in the future about bourbon casks specifically. We've talked about spirit versus cask. We've talked about flavour. We've talked about lots of those things. But I needed to find somebody that I could reach out to that could talk about how cask filling and maturation of whiskey in the modern era is a wee bit different from how it used to be. We know much more about it now. Very modern, very recent thing. We control our spirit much more tightly than we ever have in the past. And we know much more about the different types of wood and the effects that it has over what amount of time. It's become much more of a thing. People in whiskey have been saying for years that the wood makes the whiskey. It's been a long-term thing. But now we know more about it than ever. But the community know more about whiskey and maturation and everything that goes along with it than they ever have as well. It's fantastic. But it sometimes causes a wee bit of confusion. So I had to reach out to somebody that knew a bit about making whiskey, but knew a bit about casks as well, and maturation and the management of those casks. Anthony Dunn says, I am indeed in Northern Ireland. Great memory. Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for... sometimes I get it right. Sometimes I embarrass myself. Whiskey Malt Content is saying, hi, Roy. Cheers to you, my friend, from Vlad down south. Vlad, you had there's a case in point. Vlad had to remind me that he was called Vlad only a week or so ago. Vlad, nice to welcome you, my friend, and nice to have you in as well, Anthony. Cheers. So I reached out to Scott Adamson at Tomatin and I said, listen, here's my topic I've got in my mind. Do you think there's any chance that I could get Graham Eunson interested in coming on and do nothing but hanging out with the barflies and talking about casks? And Scott said, let me ask him. And he was more than happy to say aye. Hans Waldman is saying, can you ask Graham about how ruby port casks come to be? Tawny pipes make sense, but port producers don't use casks for ruby as far as I know. We will do as deep a dive as we can, Alexander. It's wonderful to have you in, my friend. Hans Waldman is Alexander from Switzerland. I know I'm remembering that right. I will do as deep a dive as possible, and I will try to keep that in my memory in order to pitch it to Graham at some point when we get onto that topic. Hopefully you're still here, Alexander, and I'll do my very best. But Graham said, aye, he would be willing to come on and hang out with us, and I'm very grateful to an absolute gentleman. If he's good to come in now, I'll reach out to my friend, Graham Eunson, and I'll say, Graham, so good to welcome you, my friend, behind the bar at the vPub. How are you?
Very well, thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation to come along. It's the closest I've come to a pub in, must be over a year now.
You and me both.
I could say that in the past.
A bittersweet moment. I'll just, as a wee aside, I pulled out a couple of glasses here to have in front of me, and the way I control what I'm going to sip on a vPub generally is to put out a set amount of clean glasses. I have 4 clean glasses in front of me tonight. The first one I put that Glenglass on, Graham, but this one, you can maybe see the inscription on that says Glasgow 2020 from SMWS.
Oh, yes.
I picked this up, I think, the last time I was in a pub. The SMWS in Bath Street, Scotch Malt Whisky Society in Bath Street had just opened. They had the launch. It was maybe the launch night I got this, actually. That would make sense, but that was in March. And then I was there on a Friday evening with some friends on the, I think it must have been the Friday the 13th of March 2020. There you go. That's exactly what it was. It's the last time I was in a pub. Same for you.
It would have been the last time I was actually in a pub would have been in February last year in Rome. I went over for the Italy-Scotland rugby. I only went over for a week with my wife and a couple of friends. In fact, there was about 16 of us ended up being there at the same time. And we did frequent 1 or 2 pubs during that week. But that would have been it. That would have been the last time. So it's quite some time ago.
I think I would. That sounds nicer being in a pub in Rome to follow some sport than it does being in a rainy Glasgow. But it's the company you're with, isn't it? It's the folk that you're with.
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely.
The folk that I was with that night were special folk indeed. Graham, for folk that don't know you, there's people out there that's maybe going to have associate you with Tomatin, but you've got 3 decades under your belt now making whiskey. I've heard wee stories that you had ideas of being an electronics design engineer. You wanted to be an architect, things like that. I was doing a wee bit of reading, but you stumbled into whiskey. Let's just before we get on the cask topic, let's ask who is Graham Eunson? How did you end up knee deep in whiskey?
It's a rather long and boring story, to be honest. But when I was born and brought up in Orkney, islands off the north coast of Scotland. And despite doing reasonably well at school, there was no way that I was ever going to leave Orkney and go to university. Was just out of the question. If I had gone, I would probably have gone to try and become an architect. But I just didn't want to leave Orkney. I saw no need to. It was the centre of the universe, and there was nowhere else that I needed to live. So I actually became an apprentice joiner, carpenter. But I managed to break my leg quite badly playing football for Orkney against Shetland up in Shetland just before my 18th birthday.
So that's like a local derby then, Orkney versus Shetland, right? Yeah.
There's some great friendships there, but it is very, very serious when it comes to that actual game. Yeah, serious crunch match. So that unfortunately I broke my leg, and I spent over a year in plaster, 18 months off work. So my apprenticeship as a joiner disappeared. I then got a job in a Ford franchise garage and became manager of the parts department and such like. I applied for a job at Master Distillery. They were looking for a trainee brewer. Applied for it, but didn't get it. But a few months later, Stuart Perry, who was manager there at the time, came into the garage I was in for fuel, and I just happened to be walking past where he was parked. And he said to me, "Oh, Graham, you still fancy a job at the distillery?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" And he says, "Right." He says, "It's in the warehouse, pushing cask, warehouse labourer, warehouse operator type thing." He says, "Are you interested?" I says, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, when can you come and see me?" And I didn't want to appear too keen, so it was, well, lunchtime, So, but no, it was a few weeks later I went out, spoke to them, and it'd been a couple of months after that I actually started at Scapa as a warehouseman. Spent 8 days in the warehouse, off to Edinburgh, got married, honeymoon, came back, and Stuart says to me, when he called me into the office, which is always a bit worrying, and said to me, like, "How do you fancy going on shift? One of our shift guys is actually going to be leaving. So there's a vacancy there." So I became a mashman. I then spent some time in the still house, still working every 4th week in the warehouse as well, because that's how we operated then. And then I got offered the chance to move into the office side to learn some of the administration and basically become the trainee brewer that I'd originally applied for. So I did that. I broke my other leg, actually playing football again. Which
so did you end up working for the person that had previously declined you the job in the first place?
Yeah. It was Stuart who turned me down, and he actually picked a good friend of mine who works in the industry, Derek Sinclair, to get the job. And Derek, to be fair to him, has got some chemistry type qualifications from uni and all that, so he was probably more educated than I was. But no, Derek got a move south with Allied Distillers, I suppose, the owners at the time. So I got a job there then. Not the same one, but ended up doing basically what I had applied for. But then there was a downturn in the industry in the early 90s, and Scapa was mothballed.
Yes.
In 1993. So in January 94, I got transferred to Glendronach Distillery in Aberdeenshire. And at that stage, the idea of leaving Orkney was, yeah, no problem. My wife, who had been born and brought up,
so it was no longer the centre of the universe. Then it was
the whiskey industry became centre of the universe.
Okay, yeah.
So moved down to Glendronach with my wife and my 1-year-old son. My daughter was then born at Glendronach. I was there for about 3 years. And in my last year there, I managed to mothball Glendronach as well. So I was starting to have a bit of a trend there.
Yeah.
So
the of whiskey distilleries.
Exactly. I was getting a bad reputation.
Yeah.
So
but it was the 90s though, right? Let's remember this.
Yeah, it was tough times actually back then for the whiskey industry. I mean, back in the days, it was always much more peaks and troughs. We still have them, but I think they're slightly flatter now than they used to be, and hopefully that will continue to be the case. But I decided that there was the chances of any more furtherment of career with Allied Distillers at that time was looking less and less likely. So I actually applied for a job at Glenmorangie Distillery. Went through an assessment centre and was lucky enough to get that job, which was assistant manager. Manager at the time was Dr. Bill Lumsden, who most people will have heard of, I guess.
Sure.
So Bill then, just about a year and a half later, maybe got himself promoted and moved down to head office down near Edinburgh here. And I became manager at Glenmorangie, which came as a bit of a surprise to me. I still remember the night he told me that was going to be happening. And I was there then for a further almost 10 years. So I was just under 12 years in total at Glenmorangie. Until I met in one day with Stuart Nickerson, ex-Highland Distillers, ex-Glenfiddich and such like. And he said that he was opening up a distillery that had been shut for 22 years, and would I be interested in coming along there as manager? The romance of it really, my wife would argue I don't have a romantic bond in my body, which is probably right, but when it comes to whiskey, the idea of having mothballed 2 distilleries, okay, I expanded production at Glenmorangie when I was there, but to reopen a distillery that had been lying dormant for 22 years was more than I could resist. So I went there with the project basically of reopening a distillery that had lain silent for 22 years. There had been thieves had broken in trying to steal all the copper work. They'd even stole some of the cast iron pipe work, which is no value at all. But
so which distillery are we talking about?
We are talking about the one you flagged up there, Glenglassaugh Distillery, again in Aberdeenshire, near Port Soy. Beautiful setting, looking over the sea at Sinine Bay. Absolutely stunning. There was quite a lot of time I spent up on top of the mash house roof. It's a 1960s type building. Its architecture's questionable, let's say, but the view from up on the top was absolutely stunning. Looking down on the bay, you have surfers in there, summer and winter, if there's big waves coming in and such like. Stunning.
So what year would this have been? The revival of Glenglassaugh was, I think,
2008.
2008, right?
2008, yes. I actually joined Glenglassaugh on the 1st of April Fool's Day 2008, and I wasn't sure the first time I went and stood in the stillers that was quite a poignant date, because it did not look in good condition particularly. It was all corroded, and I did think, what have I done, leaving the beautiful stillers at Glenmorangie to come to this? But I think I've said to you before, actually, that the first mash we actually put in was one of the highlights of my career, I would say. That just the sense of achievement, that wonderful smells coming to life again in a distillery that had been quiet for so long. It was really a special moment.
And you losing that idea of you being the Grim Reaper of distilleries, bringing this thing back to life. And I remember you mentioning this, actually. You mentioned that a lot of people talk about the first spirit flowing from the still, how that kind of gets them, it chokes them up and they get emotional. But what got you was the smell of the mushroom, the fact that you were mashing, that Glenglassaugh was mashing again after, as you say, 20 years, bringing that back. See, when it happens, it doesn't matter if you join on 1st April, when you're able to do something like that, it must feel pretty special. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many special moments when you work in the whiskey industry, but to me that was one of the highlights. It was so many things. It was quite emotional in a lot of ways. And I would have to, I will freely admit that it was myself and a guy called Alan Willits, who's sadly no longer with us. And Alan had a lot of experience in the whiskey industry as well. Well, he was the mashman that day, because there wasn't very many of us there. And we started everything up, looking to make sure that it was all going to work. And we opened the grist slide. It was all manual. You pulled the slide open and opened the wheel and such like to get the grist to flow. And all of a sudden, there was just the water stopped flowing into the mash tun over the spout. We'd forgotten to turn on the mashing machine. Some simple basic things. But it was just the sheer excitement for the whole thing. It's not like the modern computerized distilleries where you press a button almost and everything starts in sequence. We had to physically go and start everything up, and we forgot about basic thing, the mashing machine. So it was, get that started, and away it went, and the smells and this whole experience was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And to put this into context, at that moment in time in Glenglassaugh, there was only a handful of rejuvenated or revived distilleries or new distilleries on hand. There was Arran that was new, obviously 95. Glengyle would have been brought back on stream after 80, 90 years. You had Daftmill, which would have been new. I can try to think Kilchoman, again, a new distillery as well. So that idea, this life being sparked back into the Scotch whisky industry at that time must have been quite fascinating. Oh, so definitely, yeah. Was that your step before Tomatin then? Yes, that was. Yeah, that was my final distillery before moving on to Tomatin. Yeah, and I mean, Glenglassaugh, as I say, absolutely tremendous experience. That whole project of bringing it back to life.
But then another year or two after that was a case of, there was some days actually if Alan was off sick. We only had 2 operators. So one of them went off sick. I would actually have to go back on the tools, so to speak, and do that, mashing and running the distilleries, because we had 1 operator at a time type thing. So it was quite good in some ways to do that, but career-wise, probably not the best move, but I wouldn't swap it for anything for all that, So, but no, there was a limit to how much of a challenge was left once it was actually fully operational again and everything going. And I happened to get a phone call one day from Bob Anderson, who was chief exec at Tomatin. My name had obviously been put to him by someone to potentially take on the role of general manager at Tomatin. Because Dougie Campbell, who was former distillery manager, was retiring, and he was actually becoming a brand ambassador role for a few years. So I went over and spoke to the guys and said, yeah, it sounded interesting. In that it was, at one time, the biggest single malt distillery in Scotland back in the 70s, and it held that title right up until probably Macallan, maybe Rosile, but Macallan and Glenlivet are now much, much bigger, obviously.
12 million litres back in the
12.5 million litres, which if you convert 1970s barley into the modern sort of yields you can get, you're probably talking near a 14 to 14.5 million litres capacity. But the whole thing was that they were moving away from the bulk and they were wanting to become much more branded to get the single malt Tomatin out there. And that to me was the real attraction, that it was almost like at the beginning of the journey.
Is this 2011 now?
Yes, 2011. Yeah.
So this is Tomatin firmly not just kind of branding the product, but wanting to focus on making the best malt at the time, and because they saw the future, they saw their past, their history, saw more and more focus, more and more of the future being built around their own brand, their own destiny, their own product.
Absolutely,
so this is 2011. So you're coming up on a decade then.
I'll be 10 years comes the 1st of August this year. Yeah.
Fantastic. And now, so that was a general manager at that position at 2011. So if we were to take the Arcadian Graham Eunson out there in Orkney thinking that he's living in the centre of the world, and incidentally ended up, not first time, but in second attempt perhaps, ended up at Scapa Distillery, another amazing distillery. And then if we take you through you're joining there as in the warehouse, quite interestingly, you never got the job of at the brewer stage. You started at the warehouse, going through the mash house, ending up in the brewing and things, before you went on to do much bigger things and more kind of sales and business development orientated things. That took you through the Scotch whisky landscape. It took you to Glendronach as a brewer. It took you further on than that, ending up reviving distilleries again rather than closing them down and bringing them back on stream. Ended up at Glenmorangie working for Bill Lumsden for a while, and then an opportunity to be the gaffer, if I can use that word, at Tomatin. And you've been there ever since. So we've got, and the more people I speak to, Graham, whiskey, the more I realise that there's so many of them, literally get dirt under the fingernails from every part of the process, everything, whether it's sourcing grain and barley malt and things, whether it's the mashing, whether it's fermentation, whether it's distilling, whether it's warehouses, whether it's everything. And they are often the most insightful and fascinating people to talk to. The reason I reached out to you tonight to talk about casks was that to understand, first and foremost, before we talk about what a cask is, that handshake between the spirit that flows off the still, what you're actually going to fill the cask with. That is the primary thing, because you have to know, before you know what kind of cask you're sourcing, what your plan is, you have to control that spirit. And you and I had an interesting chat about the modern spirit is controlled to the nth degree. You know exactly how to get the spirit consistent now. And is that different from when you started back in the early 90s at Scapa?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it isn't, it's not. I mean, I'm going to answer a lot of questions with probably it isn't, it's not. Yeah, maybe yes, maybe not.
Sure, that's fine. There doesn't need to be a black or a white. This is the vPub. We can explore the complexities. Sure.
No, I mean, the one thing that I do remember that stands out to me at Scotland when I was a mashman was that we mashed into mash tun in Fahrenheit, but we pumped through to the washbacks in centigrade. Because the temperature gauge for pumping through to the washbacks had actually broken and had been replaced with a new one, which was in centigrade. Now, we went to centigrade to the metric system way back in the early 1970s, was it? Even the 60s, I can't remember.
The decimalization was the 72 or something, wasn't it?
Something like that, yeah. So I mean, it's been on the go for a long while, but everything that was there that still worked, we kept using until it broke and had to be replaced with something new. It was a great way to learn because it was very, very manual, hands-on. You know, it was.
But when that happens, you're not just making a mistake, but you're probably having to understand then the consequences of that mistake.
Yeah. But you also learn that if you look into the mash tun, you can tell by the consistency. You know, whether if it's too solid or too wet. If it's just right, it almost looks like sort of cauliflower as it lands, you know, into the mash tun plates initially and such like. So there's so many things that you wouldn't pick up by looking at a computer screen that you would, you know, looking at it with your eyes. And that's what the old guys did. You know, in the good old days, it was all down to experience. And in some ways, I miss that. I mean, we still have, well, we've got a lot of computerization now in our distillery and across the industry. We still run our stills manually. You know, it's still the stillman has to judge just how much to open the valve, and that's done by the look of the eye. We don't have flow meters, we don't have density meters or anything like that. It's done the old-fashioned way, but the computer allows you to do it by remote control other than the steam. You know, so I still like to have a bit of manual input because to a certain extent, it's never been proven to me that having 100% consistency because it's machines doing the work gives you the whiskey that will become fantastic in the future. Sometimes you need that mistake made by one of the operators, whether it's in the mashes or in the still house, you know, that it just gives it that something different that 15, 20, 30 years down the line, you can actually go, wow, that is amazing, that whiskey. What happened there? And the thing is, you have absolutely no idea because you didn't really record the mistakes they made. Most of them would cover up any mistake and say nothing about it type idea, you know. So that it's yes.
What you're talking about there is super interesting because you're talking about the human influence on that spirit. So you're talking about wee mistakes here and there, letting it run a bit too long, a bit too hot, a bit too early, whatever it is. But just and that idea that maybe one shift could produce a slightly different spirit to the next shift, just because it's different hands on the valves or whatever it may be. And that's something that people have talked about in a kind of romantic way for years. But you're here and you're obviously making things very automated facility up there in Tomatin, very tightly controlled on the spirit and things. But you're willing to accept that that was, and in some distilleries here and there and everywhere, very much part of the process, that human hands make a difference. Tell me, if you were given, I know you're director of distilling, and I know that you've got a lot of pressure because it's not just the Tomatin brand, it's Caboken, it's all the contracts and the blends and everything else that you're responsible for. If you could introduce a wee bit more human element, if you had the budget, if it was doable in the structure of within the framework of Tomatin, would you choose to do it if you could?
Yeah, I definitely would. It's maybe a sign of age. You know, maybe getting too old, I dwell too much in the past. But no, I like that manual input. And even though we have done a lot of upgrades and computerization and such like, we still have a certain amount of flexibility within that. That comes down to the operators. You know, they don't come in on a Monday morning at 6 o'clock and press the go button and then just sit back and have a snooze. You know, there's still quite a bit of manual input that we have.
I've been to Tomatin. I've walked through the whole facility. I've seen it all. There's activity, people floating around. There's clearly stuff going on. The scale of it is quite something else. Honestly speaking, there's that relic of the past, that history that you have there, but it's huge. So I have seen that activity happening there. But that's fascinating to hear you say that to me. Fascinating, and it makes a lot of sense because we're not talking about the old days where we were making whiskey consistently as possible and then blending it to make it as consistent as possible to put a brand on it and sell it as a blend.
Yeah.
We're speaking about celebrating the variation and the flavour development and the excitement of chasing single malts for single malt's sake, and that different profiles and how slightly different tweaks here and there can make a sometimes incidentally or serendipitously wonderful dram at the end of the day for after how many years. It's fascinating. So let's imagine then, Graham, that we've got that spirit, we've got that locked in spirit that we can, let's say, within a window of error, we know what that's going to be. Some people say that the cask is responsible for 60%, some a wee bit less. Most say a wee bit more than that. I summarised at the opening of this vPub tonight the idea that we were a few days to make new make. I didn't mean to demean that in any way. Of course, it takes much longer to grow the barley, to make the casks way in advance, to everything. But generally speaking, for that malt arriving, let's say, to the spirit flowing is a matter of a few days.
Yeah.
But the rest of that whiskey's time before it reaches us is in a wooden cask.
Yeah.
What would Graham Eunson's take be on that? How important is the cask? That idea that the wood makes the whiskey. How much weight is in that statement?
It's one of the things that I've always said in the past, that to me, maturation, the time spent in the cask, is the single most influential part. It's not the most important, because I would say all parts are equally important. You need to get them all right, but it is undoubtedly the most influential. And for want of a better word, your stereotypical single malt, you're probably talking on average around about 70, 75, up to 80% of the flavour comes from the time in the wood.
Wow.
Some will be slightly less than that, and it depends on the wood as well, obviously. If you're really heavily sherried, it's going to have a bigger influence than a second or third fill ex-bourbon will. But on average, I would say you're probably talking about, let's say, 75% of your flavour coming from the cask, and all of the natural colour again comes from the cask. So it's undoubtedly the single most influential part of the whole process, and a good quality maturation can really save a poor whiskey, as in the poor spirit, but poor cask can really spoil good spirit. So you really do need to get both right to get the best of both worlds.
And that's interesting, because even if we go back 100 years where wood management, and honestly, the people who didn't really care about wood, whatever container they got their hands on 100 years ago, they were filling. It could have previously held tobacco or other dry products and any kind of liquid. I mean, we were just using it as a container. And over time, it was we fathomed out that oak was the best container because of that. And I know that they talk about additive, subtractive, and interactive effects on maturation, but we discovered oak was the thing. Primarily, though, up until the war, I guess, we would have been using any old wood, mostly sherry if we could get our hands on it for the premium stuff, right? Post-war, obviously, because of the availability of bourbon casks from the States, due to the union agreements in the States, we could get our hands on good quality bourbon casks, so they started to come on the scene post-war.
Yeah, we are Scottish after all, so if we see a bargain by getting ex-bourbons quite cheap, we'll take them.
I hear in the modern days it's less of a bargain as it was way back in post-war. I mean, we could pick them up for next to nothing back then. We're paying a premium now for casks. But that's interesting that you mentioned that as well, because firstly, we're in oak, it's wholly oak. Let's talk about the fact that we can only use oak, Graham.
Mm-hmm.
In Scotch whisky maturation, I know there's some other species of oak used occasionally here and there, but generally speaking, we're talking about American white oak, Alba, Quercus alba, and Robur, which is European oak.
Yeah.
You've had experience with both.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you're probably going to answer for Tomatin and the Scotch whisky industry as a whole. What's the split between the two in modern times, between European oak and American oak?
Oh, American oak in modern times, you're probably way up, somewhere in the regions of 80% of casks being filled will be European oak. Maybe even higher than that if you really think about it, because some sherry casks, in fact, quite a lot of sherry casks are actually American oak. So American oak is by far the biggest wood type that we use. European oak, there's less of it.
Even all the old legacy casks that people are trying to get as much life out of as they can, that they've had for decades, European oak casks and things. More than 80% in existence right now is American oak.
I would have guessed so, yeah. I would have guessed so. Just from what I've seen in the last 30 years, it is by far and away American white oak is the most common wood type used. You do have, individual companies like, take for instance, Macallan, who obviously do a huge amount of sherry cask maturation. They will probably have a completely different balance to achieve that. But if you take your average sort of single malt whiskey and even your average blended whiskey, you're going to be talking a lot of American white oak that is used in the maturation process. Yeah.
So in a snapshot, are you able to give a really broad brush, really simple, all other things being equal, the difference between American oak and European oak in your experience, what it does to the dram?
Yeah, your American oak will give you much, for want of a better description, lighter character. You get much more of the vanilla, coconut type sweetness coming through.
So that's not coming from bourbon.
No, that's coming from the wood.
Right?
That's coming from the wood, yeah. Because we can use virgin oak casks, which we'll probably speak about later anyway, but they will give you that intense character of coconut vanilla, and sort of toffee type sweetness coming through as well. Whereas your European oak is much more of it's more like a sherry actually. You get more of the sort of dried, spicy, deeper notes. It's much richer. The characteristics coming from the European oak. In fact, some people argue that the European oak has more influence than the sherry actually does. So the type of sherry is less important than the actual type of wood, the species of wood, that's being used. So it's quite.
I remember Charlie McLean interrupting me and saying, "Roy, be careful. Because what you're talking about there is the previous incumbent flavouring the whiskey. It's far more likely to be the wood that's flavouring the whiskey with some notes or highlights or flickers of the previous incumbent." And that struck me. That was quite interesting to be reminded that, because we get carried away and we talk about bourbon flavours and sherry flavours, we're making sense there, but we're maybe grasping more on wood flavours potentially. Yeah,
it's the combination of the two. I mean, I would argue, and this is no disrespect whatsoever to the bourbon industry, but I would argue that the type of bourbon isn't really so important, because it's sort of rinsing out the wood first time around for us to then use for our whiskies. So single malt Scotch whisky is a bit more delicate, arguably. It can be matured in virgin oak casks, but it's inclined to overwhelm the characters that we're looking to produce. So again, it's not a right and a wrong, because I actually personally love bourbon, but it's a case of to work with the whiskey industry in Scotland, using ones that have been rinsed out for 4 or 5 years with bourbon works better for us. So that the bourbon isn't quite so important, that you'll make of bourbon and such like. When you go to sherry, you've got your Oloroso, you've got your Fino, you go right through to PX, Pedro Jimenez. That will have an impact, because there is a certain amount of the previous incumbent, as you say.
The liquid still in the wet cask.
There's nothing left in the cask in as much as running around inside it, because you have to empty that out before you fill it under regulations. But everything that's soaked into the wood will be drawn back out again when we put spirit into it. And that will impart a certain amount of flavour. But Charlie's right, that the wood is every bit, if not more important, in what it will do. So there's a modern trend now, it's not that modern really, but for getting casks seasoned with sherry. So you will have a brand new cask, it'll be seasoned with sherry. It may only be seasoned for a year, it may be 4 years, it could be anywhere in between. But some people like it with just a year with the sherry, because they feel that's enough. That the sherry influence soaks into the wood, but you don't take away too much of the wood extractives, and you'll actually get better results, richer, deeper sherry notes by having a younger cask, which has only been rinsed or seasoned for a short period, compared with longer. So that, again, I would always argue that there isn't a right and a wrong to that. It's whatever suits you best and whatever you prefer for your spirit to give you the character at the end of the day. It's like artists.
Well, that's a good, and I don't mean to interrupt you there, but if we drift away from this, because there's a bit of a debunking we could do there. so much of my community, so much of my own personal thought over the years has always kind of wondered, why do we talk about seasoning here? Why am I reading these comments left and right that talk about throwing in some sherry syrup and sloshing it around for a little while, and using these kind of these kind of cheap seasoned sherry casks? But the more you dig into it, the more that you discover that, sorry, the old romantic days of taking these disused transport sherry casks that used to come over to the UK that often for weeks and months had this really rich, mature sherry in it. Those days are gone. That's since 1983. That can't happen anymore. The use of Paxarette then to season these casks, gone as well. In the late 80s, that was discontinued. It's clearly an additive. Some people despise the use of it. Some people dream of Paxarette matured sherry matured whiskey. Sorry, but that's gone. So if we want that profile of whiskey to exist in Scotch, we need to put a supply chain in place. Absolutely. I guess, and that's what you're talking about now. The difference is the complexities come in: specification of the wood, American or European, the specification of the seasoning liquid, the sherry itself, how it's done and for how long, right? And your experience, give me a typical, or maybe even a Tomatin typical sherry spec cask.
I mean, what I will normally order now for us, we've got a couple of sources of sherry casks. One of them that we get is seasoned with Oloroso sherry. It's European oak, seasoned with Oloroso sherry for about 4 years actually. The other ones we get, we don't normally still specify European oak. We prefer that. And it is seasoned, I should say, with Oloroso for 2 years. Now, it's also, the 4 years are actually butts, always butts. We don't get hogsheads with a 4-year seasoning. The ones that we get with 2 years, some of them are butts, some of them are puncheons, and some of them are hogsheads. So we get different sizes.
That's a good place to pause right there. So you've got programs going on there, and this is fully down to then what the end product's going to be to your spec and also cost, no doubt. You've got butts requiring 4-year maturation, and you've got hoggies, you've got puncheons and butts that are fine at 2 years, a more light touch, let's say a lighter thing. Let's talk about the difference between a hoggie, 250 litres, typical warehouse racking in Scotland for 100 years plus, 250-litre hoggie casks. Then you're talking about a butt and a puncheon. What's the difference between those two? Is it the wood? Is it the scale, the size? What?
The butts and puncheons are both around about 500 litres bulk that they will hold. But a butt is a longer, more cigar shape, let's say, for want of a better description. A puncheon is a shorter, broader, it's bigger circumference, but shorter in length, but it holds about the same volume.
So why specify the difference? But why choose one over the other? What's the difference?
It's sort of came around by accident. The supplier we use, who are actually based in Montia, which isn't a sherry part, it can't be certified as sherry under the sherry rules. They actually have them seasoned for me in Jerez, so they have proper sherry certified casks, but they're made in Montia. And it was he phoned me up one day and said, this will be a few years ago now, and said that he said, I don't know if you're interested, but we've got some European oak here, but it's in relatively short lengths. We can't really use it to make butts because it's just slightly too short, but we could make you some puncheons, and I'll knock a few pound off the price, or a few euros it would be off the price. So never being one to pass up on an opportunity to save some cash. It was a case of, I'm quite happy to give that a try. And they seasoned them, and we got them shipped to us, and we used them for finishing initially, so it was a shorter period of time, not full maturation. And the difference in the quality of finishing was virtually nil, which makes sense really because the casks are the same size, so your surface contact to volume ratio is going to be roughly the same. So it didn't make a huge difference. So from then on in, I said, yeah, let's keep the order the same as we had last year. So it just turns out that some of them are puncheons. And then we also have the hogsheads that are for a different reason.
So what you're talking about then is you contacting a cooper who then works in collaboration with a bodega in Spain and Jerez. So Montilla, did you say, for the cooper, then works with the Jerez bodega to bring you the casks of your specification, hoggies, butts, puncheons, 2 years, 4 years. Are you also controlling then, because in order to make a barrel shape, we historically heated these wood staves in order to make them bend into the shape we need them.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it turn out another serendipitous thing, right? That heating of the wood on the inside, in the case of European oak being toasted, would have changed how the sugars and the lignins and the hemicellulose and all these things in the cask caramelizes to flavor the whiskey.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if we're talking about American oak, and especially specifically in the case of bourbon, they go further than that. Once the cask is coopered, they're charring the inside of that to give it a carbon layer. So are you doing that to your specification as well?
Well, for the sherry cask, we don't have them charred. They're toasted as part of the manufacturing process. But we've not actually specified that to the cooper in Spain. We left him to decide on just how much heat they need to use to make the casks. And they do that on a continuous basis, so that there's no big variation there.
That's a consistent thing. Yeah.
So we didn't look to change that in any way whatsoever, because we didn't feel we needed to specify it. We just left him to do the manufacture of the cask as they had done for many years, because we found that worked quite well for us. Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll get on to the American casks, the American white oak, the bourbon, the hoggies, and the virgin casks in a second. Graham Fraser is asking, many varieties of oak can be used in casks. Quercus alba, Quercus robur are the two used predominantly. Would make a good question to Aquavita on the use of other casks. I know about Petrea. Interestingly, I've been doing a wee bit of research for tonight, and obviously the quiz at the end as well. But it's not. The legislation says oak, Graham, right? It doesn't specify the species of oak.
Any oak. Yeah.
Exactly. Petrea is another, the sessile oak, I think they call it, or something, and there are staves and casks out there in the industry. Interestingly, just as a quick aside, do you think there are still some cherry wood casks out there, some acacia wood, some chestnut casks? Do you think
it wouldn't surprise me?
Have you ever come across any in your time?
I do know of, I didn't actually see them, but I knew of some cherry wood casks. And I was reliably told by someone who had nosed and tasted the whiskey. Well, it wasn't actually whiskey, it couldn't be, but the spirit, let's say, it would have been best described as a cooking whiskey. It wasn't particularly good. The great thing about oak is that it allows the whiskey to breathe. Oak is quite an unusual wood in that it almost acts like a natural Gore-Tex. It keeps the liquid in, but it allows the air to breathe in and out. There is a name starting with a T, which I can never remember, for the wee plugs that are in the grains that stop the liquid from actually seeping out. So it allows the oxidation of the whiskey to take place. So I think it's probably the wood type that this acts best with, because we need that breathing in and out. We lose 20% per year, roughly 2% per annum, to the angel share. But that is actually vital, because the oxygen coming in helps create so much of that complex flavours. Because the one thing about maturation that I always go back to is it isn't only about the wood and the wood-driven flavours. It's about the reaction with the air that gets into the cask, the oxidation that takes place. And that oxidation can give you so much more complex range of flavours than you'll ever get from the onslaught of a virgin oak cask or a first fill sherry cask or a first fill bourbon. That can mask a lot of the subtleties, whereas a second or third fill can allow much more complex flavours to develop through the oxidation, which takes a heck of a lot longer. But it gives you that depth of character there that you can then mix and marry lots of different ones together to give you the final.
Occasionally folk have heard me kind of romance a little bit about that idea. We take that spirit and we put it in a cask that's not overt enough, it's quiet enough to let the interaction happen, so that, you know, the spirit isn't overpowered, the wood isn't tired enough so that it can't at least impart some positive aspects, but then leave it there working, communicating like that for long enough so the environment and that oxidative effect that you're talking about can have a voice to the environment. And it's in that kind of little discussion that we've had, we've kind of summarized then, you know, the additive effects of a cask then from the previous incumbent potentially, but more likely from what's been happening with how that wood's been treated, how it's been heated and made, and what kind of wood it's from the subtractive elements, whether it's going to be a toasted finish or perhaps a charcoal layer. I know we're going to talk about a wee bit more as well. And then what you talk about there is the interactive elements there, where the spirit and the wood are working together, but it's breathing, it's an active living thing, and over time we reap the benefits of that. Time for a dram. Gregor from Oregon. Gregor, my friend Gregor, is coming in and saying, Graham knows how I feel about the Tomatin PX. Can he maybe elaborate on what casks that nectar is double aged in? Can't call it finished. Well, clearly it's Pedro Jimenez, of course, Gregor, but you're probably asking Graham, and I know this was a thing that happened in the YouTube community about 2 years ago. One of the channels in the States, Scott and Bart, the Scotch Test Dummies, did blind, fully blind, double blind sherry, let's say sherry monsters, sherry bombs, whatever you want to call them, overtly sherry cast whiskies. And they put them in this 16 blind challenge shootout, and this thing kept punching everything else at one, and then it overall won. What's really interesting is that they both chose it as their favourite. Fully blind. They didn't know that had happened until the big reveal at the end. And it turned out to be the Tomatin PX. So, I mean, it got a lot of, suddenly it's much more expensive to buy, but that's a discussion for another time. It got a lot of discussion going, a lot of people connecting with it. I bought a bottle of it, and my goodness, this stuff you could pour over ice cream. But I think what Gregor might be asking there, would that be European oak, or would that be American oak, or would you not be sure? Would it depend on the cask?
To be honest, I'm not 100% sure what that was, because the PX casks, we can actually get casks seasoned now with Pedro Jimenez, but the ones in question that were in the Bobby Road and the Visitor Centre, they were ex-Bodega, so that casks were probably 20, 30 years old, and I was never told, and I guess you could have them scientifically analysed to find out, but to be honest, well, who really cares, because the whiskey's the important thing, and it is quite amazing. We actually have
if you were to hazard a guess then, if it was a Bodega cask, if my understanding is right, because of the easier coopering of the American oak, even back when it was far more expensive to source American oak years and years ago, decades ago, Bodega casks wouldn't typically be American oak. Would that be?
Yeah, I think you're possibly right, yeah. But as I say, there was no records there to tell me what they were, but
you were offered some Bodega PX casks and you took them?
Yeah. Why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you? Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's made some epiphany moments for so many out there in the community. Gregor as well is talking about how, I know how he feels about that whiskey. He's waxed lyrical about it in the past. I've told you about how Scotch Test Dummies connected with it.
Yeah, it's quite a few people's favourites, I have to say.
Neil Cochran is chancing his arm and saying, are those the Cadenhead's chestnut casks you're talking about, Graham? So it sounds like there's a suspicion that Cadenheads are still sitting wondering what to do on whiskey.
No, it was cherry casks that I heard of.
Cherry casks.
I haven't tried them. I also know of a Tabasco sauce cask that was once used, which was again described as a cooking whiskey when it was taken out of the cask, which wouldn't really be that big a surprise, I guess.
Tabasco sauce, yeah. A few years back, I did try some bizarre. It was actually one of them I remember was a gin cask from SMWS. Now, SMW. Now I know that wouldn't be permitted now, a gin cask, I don't think, but not least because they don't age. There's not a lot of oak maturation going on with gin, right?
But I would have to check and see if that was within the rules.
Yeah.
The rules they've changed. I was speaking about this the other day, but the rules have changed, and it's now you can't use anything that's like held spirits made from stone fruit. And I have to go onto Google to find out exactly whether something's stone fruit or not. It's a bit vague, but...
Well, what I'll do is I drop a link in here. I've got a question from Chris. I'm going to drop in a link as you mentioned that legislation. I was doing a wee bit of research and reading, but it's 92 pages long, and I started to hurt my head a wee bit because what we're not talking about is all the interesting concepts we were going to be talking about and have been talking about tonight. We're talking about the SWA regs for this. But if anybody's interested in downloading the PDF to know what the Scotch whisky regulations are, I'll paste that in the chat just now. As I ask, Chris is saying, could you ask Graham how you can tell the quality of a cask before filling, or is it simply a case of regular sampling as the whisky ages?
Yeah, I mean, you can sometimes tell the quality of a cask before you fill it by nosing it. You know, I've seen some casks that actually, when you pull the bung on it and you nose it, mostly with sherry casks rather than ex-bourbons, but the sherry cask, sometimes you get a sour note in there. Now, having said that, I've seen putting whiskey or spirit into that thinking, well, is this a good idea? But, you know, the cask cost £800, £900, £1,000, whatever. You're going to do it. And the spirit that came out the other end was actually very, very good. You know, so you can tell a bit, or you can have an educated guess, let's say, about what the quality will be by nosing the cask prior to filling them. But you're never going to know for sure. And especially with ex-bodega sherry casks, because sometimes they can look so rough and ready and tired from the outside, but the inside is quite special. You know, so it's...
Yeah, because these things have been part of potentially a Solera system and a bodega for decades and decades, right?
Yeah.
Eric Cunliffe is saying this is a deep dive masterclass. Good to have you in, Eric. He's saying, does Graham have a preferred cask that he enjoys most of for its general composition when it comes to the final product, and his favourite current tomatin? So he's asking two things in the same question there, and I know the answer to this, but I'm going to let you take the way for this one. Tell us about this cask.
My favourite type of cask, if I was to go to a go-to whiskey off the shelf that you could buy, I would go ex-bourbon cask matured rather than sherry, because that's just my own personal taste. It's not a right or a wrongs there. As for my favourite tomatin, it's not actually available yet. It's still sitting...
There's no point in teasing it for us, Graham, because I know what the answer is going to be and none of us can afford it. So
well, you never know. You never know. Speak to me nicely, you never know. No, it's a 1976 cask. Actually, number 32 is probably the best one, although there is about half a dozen of them sitting upstairs in where is number 6 at Tomatin. 1976, refill hogshead. At some point in its life, it's definitely been some sherry there, but it's not, and this is going to sound slightly biased, obviously, because of where I work now, but I've had the luxury, the pure luck actually to work in some great distilleries, and even, well, to work in a great industry, because we all share some of our best whiskies and things. That, you know, it's like a big family, the whiskey industry in Scotland. We all know one another and we all try to outdo one another with better whiskey.
And I'm sure it's no different from the community. When you have an epiphany moment with a whiskey, you want to share it, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So no, it's a 1976 refill hogshead, but the complexity of that whiskey, you know, you could almost mention any flavour, any aroma in the entire planet, and it would be in there. It's so complex. To me, it's the best whiskey I have ever tried, and I've tried some really good and really expensive whiskies over the years. But this one just was head and shoulders above, as far as I was concerned. Is
that the point? I mean, obviously, you've mentioned the cask and things, so you know you're not in a hurry. It's not like super active, but is that at the point now that you're actually are you going to wait until that's 50 years old? Are you thinking of that's going to? Oh, okay, you're nodding at 50. You think that might be a...
No, I think it'll be released before that, but I'm not really at liberty to tell you exactly when or how. But I think there will be an opportunity, let's say, to get your hands on one of these bottles from that cask within the next year or two, let's say.
Well, the one I uncorked here, it's not uncorked, it's been open for a wee while, and I think every time I go back to this now, it's beautiful. I apologise because this is the one I promised you. I will send you a wee dram of this because when you told me about that, this is not going to be that type of whiskey. This is a bit younger, at 30 years old, but still an exceptionally mature whiskey. And the reason that this is still as pale as this and as light and floral and spirity and super complex and buttery, and there's still a wee bit of malt in there as well. Everything is happening in this whiskey. Every time you pour a glass, every sip, it's going to give you something else. The complexity is wonderful. And in my first dram out of this bottle, I was left a wee bit cold. I just didn't know how to approach it. It was very tight and shy and quiet. Leave it for a wee while and it just opens right up. And this is exactly what you're talking about. 30 years. It tells us, because it's an SMWS here, it tells us a distillation of February 1990. Wow. So it was 31 years ago distilled, but it was bottled last year. Cask strength of 43.2%. That's the Angels share. Scottish, specifically Scottish Angels share you're talking about there, where the volume stays the same, but we lose alcohol, right?
No, the volume drops as well, to be fair. So
sorry, compared to the hotter climates, I meant.
Well, the strength will actually go up in Kentucky,
that where the water evaporates and the strength ends up incidentally going up. But this is 30 years, and it tells us that the cask involved here is a refill ex-bourbon barrel. That's what we talked about with those additive, subtractive, and interactive elements all working together. The spirit, the cask, and the environment, the air, the working to produce something. And I'd love to hear your feedback if you get a moment when I send you a wee drop of this through, Graham. Just to hear your feedback on this. This is from it's not Anok. It's from Knockdo Distillery. It would be branded Anok, but it's just an amazing dram. And I think that I am in full agreement with you that it's probably up there. It's my favourite style of whiskey. I love all whiskey, honestly. But if I was to choose one that I could only have, that would be this style. It would definitely. Graham Fraser is saying, I've got a bottle of that Tomatin Distillery Exclusive PX, the one that Gregor was talking about from the distillery in 2020. Its provenance just got lifted considerably now. I know it's from a Bodega cask. Absolutely. I mean, it's almost like for the enthusiasts, when you can give us that wee bit extra information, it'd be nice to have it on there. Mark Carell is saying, I'm interested in experimenting with stave blocks to put in new make. If you can afford to put your whiskey in a barrel, then why not put the barrel in your whiskey? Well, you can do that kind of thing at home. I've got Graham Young bought me a rye whiskey, a Canadian rye whiskey, new make. It comes with a wee applewood stave, and you drop the applewood inside, and you put the cork back on it and leave it. And it's interesting because his went really dark really quickly, and mine's is still pale after getting on for maybe 2 years now. That's been going, and it's down. The spirit is the same in both bottles, but the stave of wood. Despite the spec, the species of wood, the charring and things all being the same, the wood is different pieces of wood that creates a different effect. Jimmy Link is saying, when you sample a cask that you think is great, how do you make yourself blend it with other casks? Jimmy Legg is a purist. He's thinking that don't be blending these amazing casks, right? But even we blend at all stages. I say we, you, Graham, whether it's for mixing with grain to make a blended whiskey, or whether it's a marriage of casks in order to make a larger outturn. The vast majority, 90% of casks are going to end up mixed with something else, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, even if you take something like, going back to Tomatin again, obviously the legacy that we produce, it's a combination of virgin oak casks, ex-bourbon casks, but you're probably talking of, the best part of 100 casks married together to go off to get bottled, because you're doing it in reasonable volumes. Only time you're ever going to get just a single cask is exactly that. If you buy a bottle, single cask, matured, that is, but then that's going to be one unique snapshot from one single cask of a certain style, but you probably could never repeat that to be identical again.
Yes.
And it costs an awful lot more to manufacture that because the bottling costs are so much higher. Your losses are much higher.
For a single cask,
so single casks are going to be more expensive than buying your sort of core expressions. We do. I resist to use the word blend casks together for all of our, because it can be confusing. It seems a bit more romantic saying marrying casks together. That probably doesn't really fit with me either. It's just we select casks, we will empty them into a trough, pump them into a vat, and then it goes off in a tanker to get bottled. So that they're all,
whether it's blending, marriage, vatting, whatever it's going to be, it's that idea that in order to try and make a consistent product that people can buy year after year, but only using the malt that you have on hand, that's what you're doing with it. And you can put Jimmy's mind at rest, because he's coming in and he's asking, yeah, but that 1976, are you going to blend that out? I think we're safe that that's not going to be this whiskey that's made Graham Eunson kind of stand back.
Yeah, what I'd really like for it to happen is that at the moment, I can't remember exactly what it is, I think it's about 45, 46 somewhere. I'm hoping that it will drop below the 40% mark, so that it's no longer actually Scotch whiskey. And I'll just have to take it home and keep it in my
We all
garage.
get it for free. Let it drop below 40%. And then, Jimmy, unfortunately, it would end up married into something, but no doubt.
Well, probably, yes. Probably.
Yeah. That is the thing. So there we go. That's interesting that it's sitting about that mid-40s in terms of ABV after all that time as well. Let's just jump into the chat again. It's jumped. Apologies. 60 Hertz, that looks like a new name. He's saying, I'm a home distiller and jars are no substitute for barrels. Absolutely. I wonder where you are in the world then, 60 Hertz. It's nice to welcome you in here. Perhaps you're in New Zealand or somewhere where it's legal, Graham, to do a wee bit of home distilling, right?
Well, technically, it's legal in Scotland as well, as long as for your own consumption, apparently.
Is that right?
Well, according to my next door neighbour, because he's got a small scale there that he does certain things with on a very small scale. So
next to a Highlander with a wee still on the go. Fantastic. Blending sounds more industrialized than marrying. That's right. And that B word, the reason that so many people don't like the word blended being used in front of malt for a blended malt and things, it's that confusion that as soon as you hear the word blend, you're in the worlds of blended Scotch and blended olive oil, and blended just sounds in some way kind of not nearly as pure. And I think it's unfortunate that association is there, but nevertheless I understand.
It's unfortunate because there are some fantastic blended whiskies out there. You know, blending is really an art form in itself, you know, and it should be respected for that, because a good blender can make some tremendous whiskies and very consistently, and that's really what they need to be. It's just, I don't have a problem with blends, the word per se. It's just it can confuse people, because the worst thing, we always used to call it vatted malts back in the good old days, when you took two single malts from different distilleries and mixed them together. That was a vatted malt. It was understandable, but that's now called a blended malt. And to me, that's far too close to being a blended Scotch. The differential can be lost there, which is a shame, because it can confuse people.
The mini manifesto on the Aquavitae channel is, look, if it's a blend and if you're taking grain and malt and mixing it together, that's fine. It's blended Scotch, we understand. But if it's malt whiskey, it's just call it malt whiskey. Mm. If it's mixed, if it's two different distilleries that goes in, it's still malt. Just call it malt. Yeah. And if you want to further define it by calling it a single malt, use single as a differentiator, but don't put the word blended in front of malt whiskey. And while you're at it, don't add colour, don't chill filter it, keep it as natural as we can make it, because it's precious. This barley malt whiskey that we have is a precious, precious thing, I think, and I believe that we remain guardians of it. New Zealand Indeed, 60 Hertz is saying, and can you ask Graham about how ruby port casks come to be? We will touch on port casks, but I want to pick you up just before we go to Alexander's question about ruby port casks and tawny port. You talked about consistency there and that whole idea of marriage and blending and everything. It's another thing about casks, that the reason that we have to do that is you can take new make spirit flown off the still at the same moment in time and at two identical casks bought from the same parcel, the same cooper, whatever it is, filled at that same moment, put in the same spot in the warehouse, samples taken over time, left for the same amount of time, and after some amount of time, years, however long it is, you take the samples, and these two identical sister casks are different.
Yeah.
I'm asking an impossible question, Graham, but I'm going to chance it. How does that happen?
There is a reasonably simple answer to it. The spirit will be all out of the one vessel, the one filling vat. So that is going to be identical, albeit spirit. Although we can control everything in the operation within the distillery, barley is a living organism. It grows differently. The weather in Scotland can be different, so you can get different characteristics year on year, barley variety versus barley variety. But taking that out of the system by saying, right, these 2 casks are filled with identical spirit on the same day, those 2 casks wouldn't be made out of the same tree. So trees are growing living organisms. They will be different.
Yeah.
So it can come down to just the actual wood itself. The 2 trees, although they're of same species, there may be one from a north-facing slope, one from a south-facing slope.
One from a limb, one from a trunk, one from a...
Absolutely, yeah. So it can only really come down to the wood, because if the environment they're matured in is side by side for their entire maturation, the spirit was identical. The only variance that you're left with really is the fact that the trees would have been different. So the wood will have come from 2 different trees in all likelihood, which means that unless you take it down to the nth degree and cask A is nearer the wall, so maybe get slightly warmer in the summer when the sun shines, I think that's going too far, to be honest. I would suggest that the 2 casks are the ones that's what makes the difference, because the wood will be different in each of them.
So it's really that different makeup of different staves that have come together and from different parts of a tree, but potentially different batches, I suppose, of wood that have come together to be coopered into a barrel. And when we talk about 2 identical casks, we're actually just making an assumption that it's probably unlikely. But I have to say, I prefer your original answer when I asked you that question, and you just said, no, nobody knows. and there is some truth, because when we talk about investigation into wood and its effects on maturing malt whiskey, we're only going back to probably about your 1976 cask before there was any investment done in what was actually going on. This is a modern thing, because before the 80s, single malt was very, very, very niche, and it certainly wasn't exported. Well, okay, with the exception of the Glenfiddichs and Glenmorangies and things. Back then it wasn't. So, blending was taken care of. All that wasn't an issue. It wasn't a focus for anyone enjoying whiskey. All of these concepts. It's fascinating. That can be a thing.
Basically, as long as it had been a tree at some point, that was all you had to worry about. It just needed to oak, and that was it.
Aye, and if you're going to slap a brand on it, people just want to have the same experience like a bottle of Coca-Cola or anything else time after time. And that's a challenge for the organic nature of whiskey that you're talking about, that gets produced at human hands potentially, varying degrees of automation as we've covered, but then goes in and gets matured in that other organic vessel. Absolutely. 60 hertz is he's saying New Zealand indeed. So I don't know if you're an expert on this, but let's ask Alexander's question. Can you ask Graham about ruby port casks, how they come to be? Tawny pipes make sense, but port producers don't use casks for ruby.
Well, they do. You don't have to use casks for ruby port. You can mature that, leave it sitting in concrete vats type idea, but there are quite a few people who do use casks for ruby. Now, how long the ruby wine, the port spends in there, it's not that long, I don't believe, whereas tawny port casks, they can be 20, 30, 40 years old when we get them. The ruby port casks will normally be quite a bit younger, and they may be used several times as well. But no, you definitely do get ruby port that spends some time in oak casks. And in some ways, they're actually easier to get hold of, which is rather strange. The tawny port, certainly old tawny port casks, are much more difficult to get hold of. But that comes back to the same with the sherry cask that we were talking about earlier. One of the reasons that so many people are going down the route of seasoning the casks now is because bodegas weren't selling any of their old casks anymore. It was a finite number that were there. Sherry became less popular, so there was less being produced, less being made, therefore less casks. And then as sherry started to become more popular again, they need to keep that casks for their Solera systems. So
they can't dismantle their Soleras that produces the sherry in order to keep Scotch whisky going, or they can only do it once, and it would need to be a bloody good price, right?
Exactly, yeah. So it's the same goes for Port Casks. The older tawny ones are quite difficult to hold of because they're still quite keen to keep them, and the tawny spends more time in there. So I wouldn't claim to be an expert at all on port. It's one area I've never actually been to yet. I've been over to America looking around the bourbon distilleries and cooperages over there. I've been to Spain looking at various cooperages and bodegas and everything. But I haven't yet made it to port. I actually did plan going last year, but a certain pandemic of some description got in the road. So I'm not an expert on port, but I do know that you can get both ruby port and tawny port casks, so there has to be ruby port actually in those casks at some point. But for how long, it may just be a few months. I don't honestly know.
That makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense. Querty Arvark is asking, how many would chip in for an aquavitae barfly version of a crowded barrel distillery to build a distillery? It's not for me, big guy. I'm happy to put my name to it and I'm happy to get involved, but there's no way I have the drive or the time. Well, maybe in the future when I have less responsibilities at home, but wow. I thought you might have been just asking about a cask there, which is far more likely to happen. Hans Waldman saying, thanks for asking. Interesting. Some producers assured me that they don't sell ruby casks, so just asked the wrong ones. If it exists in there, if there's something that's coming from that cask, clearly somebody must be holding, maturing, and selling. It must be happening.
I mean, I've used ruby port casks before, many times. So you definitely get them, and it does have a much redder tinge to it than the tawny, because the tawny's more a sort of mahogany, brown mahogany type colour that you get from the cask.
Jimmy Legg is asking, is my dream of a distillery that only bottles a continuous series of single cask whiskies just a dream? Well, I tell you what, take it one stage further than that, Jimmy Legg, and just keep buying single casks from Indies and the SMWS and things, because then it's not all just from one distillery, it's from multiple distilleries. But I think I get the sentiment he's coming from there. We know that the spirit is kind of more or less the same from the same distillery. We're getting to try it from all these different single casks. And there are kind of single cask releases out there, single barrel releases, especially in American whiskies. You can do that kind of thing. But it's nice that we have the mix. I think it's nice that if we want to try these single cask fingerprint type experiences, we can go out and do that. If we want to have small batch or small outturn, if we want to have the large outturn, and I have to take my hat off to you, it's not because I am a lover or a promoter of Tomatin Legacy. It's because it's proved itself. I've used the Tomatin Legacy in blind challenges many times, and it is done on the channel live and in pre-recorded and edited stuff. It has continually outperformed itself. And anecdotally on that Tomatin Legacy as well. And I know that we're going back a few years now, that some of the original or maybe not the more recent legacies, but a couple of years back, anecdotally, I heard that when you were putting that together, you tried to increase, there was potentially a recipe, let's say, that was going to use more virgin oak and less refill, but the preference was on the one that had just a wee bit of virgin oak and more refill. Is that true?
Yeah, well, refill, it's first fill ex-bourbon.
First fill, okay.
Time fill anything in there. It is purely first fill ex-bourbon.
Let's spend a moment to talk about virgin, first fill, refill, just the differences between those. American oak, whether it's a barrel or a hoggie, right?
Always barrels that we use for the legacy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a barrel is, just as it's been used in bourbon, 200 litres.
Yep.
It gets exported from the States whole, arrives whole.
Yes.
Yep. And it gets filled with new make. The first time it gets filled, it's first fill.
Correct.
And any time afterwards, second, third, fourth, it's just refill.
Well, yes, but we do always put on it that it's first fill. We call them first fill, second fill, third fill. Now, because the wood, it's becoming so much more important when you're doing it for single malt that you need to know if it's first, second, third, because you need to know the amount of influence that wood's going to have on the spirit. Whereas in previous years, you would just call it refill once it was maybe second or third fill, and every time thereafter, because it wasn't quite so important when it was going into blends and things anyway. So it's one of the things now that one of the most annoying things I find, looking through our stock system, when you go back to some of the older whiskies, and even then you're talking maybe 15, 20 years ago only, is that we have a code on our computer system that holds all the stock that actually refers to casks as first refill. Now, is that first fill or is that second fill? Because the first time refill, you know, and but this is a legacy of what they used to call it back in the day. Yeah, and different companies, different distilleries will have different terminology for things. So trying to figure out what exactly is meant by first refill versus first fill, and is a first refill a second fill, gets confusing. So we're trying to move away now from calling things, for the stock control side of it, we always call it first, second, third. But when we then put it on the bottle and we're using like second and third fill casks, we'll just say refill, you know, oak or refill whiskey casks, you know, because we don't need to go down into the depth of how many of each style of cask type thing. But
I mean, I think as the community becomes more and more educated, as the enthusiast becomes more and more informed, I think there could be a drive for you in future, and pressure on the SWA to permit it, of course, to be as transparent as possible. So it's interesting that you're now defining, and it's clear where that's come from, because you've just told me that there's instances that you've got barrels on hand there, and you're not even sure if the barrels are American or European oak, and without a scientific analysis, there's no way, because they're legacy things. You've had them for so long, and there's legacy procedures and legacy admin in place to manage all of this. I was going to touch on the scale of this. How many casks are maturing just at your distillery in the Highlands right now?
When I last looked at it, which was yesterday, there was 159,762.
So the 160,000 casks. So I'm trying to picture what 1,000 casks looks like. It's like a sea of casks, right? And then 160,000 of those. Now, I've been there. I've seen the warehousing at Tomatin, and I've been in your Dunwich warehouse, your number 6 warehouse, I think. And the scale of it is really quite a contrast. So when we talk about these definitions, first fill, second fill, virgin, all the different casks, all the different sherry casks that we have, wine casks, everything, the administration of that. Now, this falls under your remit, doesn't it? Managing that amount of inventory, it must be incredible. And I imagine that Tomatin is also maturing for more than just Tomatin, right?
Oh, yes, yeah. Just over half the casks we have will actually be Tomatin, because we also do blends, obviously. So that we will have, it's round about 62% of the casks on site that will be malts, mostly Tomatin, obviously, but we do have other malts because we do reciprocal deals with lots of other companies that we swap malts with them. And then we'll also have some grain casks on site as well, because we do buy in grain for using in our blends. And then we also have some casks on site that we don't own, because we have such big warehousing complex. You know, we could probably hold, I think, into 200,000 casks if we were going to be absolutely full. But some of these are actually owned by other people, so they rent space from us, which is not unusual in the whiskey industry as well. You know, so that it's quite a mix of differing casks in the 14 warehouses we have on site. You know, that the biggest warehouse we've got is number 21, which will hold just on 30,000 casks. You know, in 3 sections. So that it's, you know, you go up to the top and stand at the front looking up the aisle, which is, you speak about a sea of casks, it is quite impressive. If you go up on the stacker, 9 casks high, looking along, it's you get used to it after a certain length of time, but I've seen taking some visitors up on the stacker, even in warehouse 11, which is quite a lot smaller. It only holds about 9,500 casks, but to go up on the stacker, it's like the Scottish equivalent of a Disneyland ride, because it gives you that sort of wow factor.
Well, if you get pleasure out of vicariously enjoying that through visitors and other people coming to see the distillery, next time I come up, I had a brilliant time, by the way, at the hands of Scott Adamson. He really, really looked after us. But next time I come up, I'll let you take me along to Warehouse 9 or wherever it may be. But it's interesting what you talk about there, because you talk about these racked systems. Mm-hmm. We can maybe touch upon briefly how these different cask sizes come to be. Okay, we'll leave out the anchors and the octaves and the wee tiny 20, 30, 40 litre things. We're speaking about Scotch malt whiskey generally here. Starts at a 200 litre American barrel, your legacy product made from that. Fantastic. That's going to come some virgin, some first fill, some second fill, etc.
Yeah.
Now, that's a new thing. That's a modern concept in Scotch whiskey. We always racked our entire warehouses and systems through the 250 litre traditional Hoggie. And the way we got around that, if I understand, this is where you interrupt, is we took 4 or 5, I think, barrels and recoopered them into 4 250 litre Hoggies.
Yeah.
That's how that came about. That's how the hogshead comes about. I understand that.
Yeah.
So it had to fit inside our logistics and our structures and our systems in order to look after these things. And then as time moved on, we adapted our warehousing to take barrels and avoid the coopering and to manage hoggies. And then we had to do the same with 500 litre puncheons and 600 litre butts and everything in between, wine barriques and all the rest of it. But can you tell me, how does a sherry hogshead, how does that come into existence? How can a sherry hogshead exist? Why would it be desirable, Graham?
It's desirable because of the fact that, as you say, most of the rack warehouses were built to hold hogsheads. Now, you can put a barrel in a hogshead space, it's not a problem, and we regularly do. But we sort of say that, in fact, of all the warehouses we have at Tomatin, there is only one section of one warehouse that you can only put barrels in. The hogsheads won't fit. Other than that, barrels, it's too small for the diameter of the cask. But traditionally, it's always been hogsheads that were used back in the day. So to get a sherry hogshead would be normally a sherry butt that is cut down in size to make a hogshead. Now that may be because the ends of the staves have become damaged. Chop the ends off and you can make it down into a hogshead size.
Okay.
It will have been that was actually requested by the distiller because they didn't have anywhere to hold the butts. If they'd gone all racked, no dunnage space left, because dunnage space is quite flexible. You can move the rails and put in whatever size cask you want. But in a racked warehouse, you can't do that. So it may well have been that people were running out of space for butts, but they still wanted the sherry influence. So they asked the coopers, can you cut that down in size, take some of the staves out? The opposite of what you do to make a barrel into a hoggie. To make a butt into a hoggie, you take staves out and cut the length off, put in a new head on either end, and there you go. Whereas now, as I said earlier, we actually demand or request that our cooper in Spain makes hogshead-sized casks and gets them seasoned with whiskey. Because the beauty, for want of a better word, the thing with using a hogshead to mature a whiskey is that you will get the influence from the wood and the sherry much quicker. The smaller the cask, the faster the wood-driven maturation. So you will have more spirit losses through the angel share in the barrel than you would ever have in a butt. But the maturation will also be quicker from the wood-driven side than it will be in a butt. So the bigger the cask, the slower the maturation. Other than the oxidation, because that doesn't vary quite so much the speed-wise. It varies slightly, but not to the great extent as the actual wood influence has.
That's fascinating, because there are some releases that come out from time to time, and they talk about what Glengoyne Teapot Dram springs to mind, for example, very kind of occasional batch thing, and they'll talk about how many butts and how many hoggies, whether it was American oak, European oak. They'll occasionally give us that breakdown, maybe not on the bottle, but we'll do a bit of internet digging, sleuthing, and we'll work out what's been used in the makeup. And I always looked at that and thought, what? How does a hogshead, why would that ever, in a traditional Scottish cask, why would that have ever held sherry? And that now you explain it to me in that way, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I can further confuse you as well, Roy, because You also get what they call, or they quite often refer to them as traditional hoggies, and they'll hold up somewhere about 280 litres because they are a bit longer.
280 litres.
Yeah, just to be confusing. So a hogshead normally would be around about 250 litres, and that's a dump hoggie, as it's quite often called. But a traditional hoggie will be more the shape of a butt. It's that bit longer, but not quite as big as a butt, obviously, and they'll hold around about 280 litres, sometimes even 300, just to further confuse things. But they will not fit because they're too long. They won't fit into a normal hoggie rack.
So suddenly they're getting treated like a butt.
So they go into dunnage warehouse along with the rest of the butt. I mean, we have some rack butt space as well at Tomatin, so we can actually put butts into a rack warehouse, and you can go 6 or 7 high with them in the rack warehouse. But the traditional hoggies are difficult because you really need to put them in a dunnage warehouse because they don't fit well anywhere else. So we don't have many of them.
Well, when we talk about all these different casks, let me put you in the hot seat and ask you a chunky question, a tricky one. We are seeing more. Okay, we've talked about the legacy. We know what's in that. And your 12-year-old Tomatin release, we're going to get a mix of bourbon and sherry and the marriage or vatting there. Talk to us about finishing. Talk to us about that idea that you're taking and re-racking crap whiskey and putting it into a fresh cask to rejuvenate it. Tell us about this idea where you're trying to fix mistakes of the past. Tell us about all of these things. I once heard somebody humorously talk about polishing turds.
Yeah.
But there is, we have to kind of debunk these things, because while that has and perhaps still endures in whiskey, we have to talk and say the words about these things. That if Tomatin only brought us the legacy in a 12-year-old, would probably get a bit bloody fed up.
Yeah.
If we were chasing variety and things, what would you say to finishing? What would you say to additional maturation and things like that? Is it all about re-racking to fix mistakes, or is there more to it?
Well, the one thing I would start off with saying is that it's actually impossible to polish a turd, but you can roll them in glitter.
In our lives in Scotland especially, we try and polish a day at the beach. Wow, it was a fabulous day in the west of Scotland at the beach. You can't polish a turd, right? You can't.
You can roll it in glitter, but yeah, the finishing, the double matured, there's so many names for it, racking operations and everything. For some reason, it's got a bit of bad press, and I think that's totally unjustified. That there may have been 1 or 2 occasions where you did actually have an inferior whiskey that you wanted to try and improve. And you can do that by finishing. Undoubtedly you can, yeah. But we've gone way beyond that. As an industry now, I would say most distillers probably do some finishing. Whether they call it finishing or they call it anything else, it doesn't really matter. It's the same process, really.
An additional maturation.
It's additional maturation, yeah, in a different style of cask. The reason that I like doing that is because it gives you the opportunity to take, we spoke earlier about using a second fill cask. It allows for more oxidation to take place. So you get a much lighter, more delicate, oxidation-driven maturation, which adds complexity. So that's good. But if you still want to have a hint of sherry in there, or a hint of port in there, or a hint of anything else, you can then do that by finishing for, let's say, for sake of argument, let's say for 2 years. So you can take whiskey that's been matured in second fill or third fill casks for, let's say, 10 years or 12 years. You then take it out of that and you put it into a sherry cask or a port cask or a rum cask or whatever you want to use for the finishing period. And the idea of that finishing is actually to add some of the flavours from the, let's say, sherry or port cask to complement the sort of the characteristics you've already got there, the complex flavours. If you took, let's say, take Tomatin again, since I know it well, the 14-year-old that we have, if we matured that for the full 14 years in a tawny port cask, it would be overwhelmed. You would lose some of that subtle delicacy that we really want to have in there, that lighter fruity notes and things. So instead of that, by maturing for 12 years, in refill casks, as we called them earlier, second or third fill. You then take it out of that and put it into the tawny port cask for, normally without 14-year, it's normally about 2 to 3 years that it sits in I would say about 2.5 years on average. But it all depends on when it's being bottled. It may be slightly older, maybe slightly younger, but
I guess it's so much to do with how active and overt the cask is, right?
Yeah, it does to a certain extent, yeah. But the thing is that what you're doing is you're complementing the original flavours that are in that whiskey by using the ones that are drawn out of the port cask. So for the finishing, we only ever use first fill cask, whether it be first fill sherry, first fill port, first fill whatever. The finishing is quite important, but you can really only get that once from that cask. We will fill our second fill tawny port casks with new make spirit and leave that. Now we only started doing the 14-year-old within the last, about 8 years ago. So we've not actually got any second fill tawny port casks yet that have ever come to market, and we don't know what we'll use them for, to be honest. It's a case of I need to go and get samples drawn and then get the team to actually start nosing them and saying, yeah, that's impressive, or we may need to finish it. So I think it gets a bad press, which is uncalled for, because to me it is another tool that is open to distillers to create flavours and characters in whiskey that wouldn't otherwise be there. And I think that most whiskey drinkers, I've got a collection of different whiskies here tonight. I'm at my daughter's house, so it's actually her collection that I've stolen for this evening. But it's a case of...
Go on, what are you sipping? What's in the glass?
Well, it's actually I'm Arcadian, so it's Highland Park I've got here in the moment.
Okay. The universe, of course. Yeah.
So I do actually have a second bottle here, a Clynelish 14.
Fantastic, right? It's one of our favourites, community favourites as well. So you've got the Highland Park here. Which edition of Highland Park is it? The
one I've got here actually is the 12.
Standard 12, right? So you're going to have a mix of bourbon and sherry in that.
Yes. Yeah.
Again, the Clynelish 14 is going to be bourbon and sherry as well. Both of those are standard mass market editions. We don't actually know what the makeup is. But what we're actually talking about here, with whether you're marrying different cask styles together or whether you're taking something that's been matured and then giving it an additional maturation, whether it's been pre-vatted or it's just barrel to barrel, what you're doing is you're bringing variation.
Absolutely.
It's in order to try and bring more flavors and expand the core profile and give your customer, your client, the person that's going to connect with that whiskey more variation and to try the spirit in different ways. I'll go back 4 years to a wonderful gentleman called Alistair Much, and he took us through a tasting at the Good Spirits Company in Glasgow, and he broke this down blow by blow, talked about if you want to taste Tomatin from a bourbon cask, this is what you're after. If you want to taste our core range, what we define ourselves by, well, that's bourbon and sherry. This is what you're after. Hey, you want to try a port finish? We put this out as our core range at 14 years old because it's our, guess what? It's our standard product, but it's matured a couple of more years, presented naturally from a port cask, 14 years old. You want to taste something that's much more mature, much more old school, and he took it through like this. Yeah. And he said, remember that generally speaking, the new make that's gone into all of these, with it, he went on to Kuboken, so that changed. The new make is the same for all of these Tomatins.
Yeah.
And he broke it down in that way, and it's that idea. I also have another thing to say, that if you do, in good faith, put whiskey into a cask, because it's the only cask that you have, because it's the casks that you're buying, because it's the whatever, and after a few years it doesn't turn out to be what you wanted it to be, where's the shame?
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I'm not going to sell this like this. This needs a wee bit of tender love and care. I put this child into a substandard environment to bring it up, and now it needs a bit of TLC to be brought more vibrant, to be brought in whatever direction you want to bring it in. And I think that this idea that of finishing to mask or to hide or to enhance, there's no doubt that it's happened and it will continue to happen. But generally, my feeling, and I think as you've confirmed, is that we are in such a state of and forming a knowledgeable customer base, a community now, that those days, there's no need for them to continue going forward.
No, but the thing is that, you know, the people who rebel against using a finishing technique to improve a substandard whiskey, let's say, well, if we didn't, what are we going to do with that whiskey? You know, why are we going to let a cask of okay whiskey? What we're going to do? We're going to start selling it as a, you know, here's the Tomatin range that's brilliant, and here's the poorer quality ones that we can't do anything with. You know, what are you going to do with it? No, you're always going to try and improve it if you do have inferior whiskey. And let's face it, you will. Every distillery will have some whiskey in casks that aren't as good as we hope they would be. So you have to do something with it. And finishing allows you to do that. But finishing is also a very, very valuable tool. And what I was going to say about, like, my daughter's collection, my son's collection, my collection, all whiskey drinkers, as far as I'm aware, love to try different whiskies, different flavours, different characteristics. It's part of the appeal of single malts. So you could accuse us of being slightly mercenary, that we want you to only drink our brand so that we will get your money. But to a certain extent, yeah, we're in the business of trying to sell whiskey for cash so that we can make more whiskey to sell for more cash on it goes. We're in the business, you know, but it is a case of it gives people a different opportunity to try different characteristics, to experiment and see what they actually prefer. And yes, they will buy other brands as well, you know, and that's great. You know, we're one big family industry, really, the Scotch whisky industry. You know,
it's one of the most amazing things is that we've got that variation. We've got so much choice out there. There's millions of whiskey, but that's the point. The more variation, the flavour chase that we talk about, the more experiences. And why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you set up your core range to be as varied as possible and try and connect to as many people as possible? Absolutely. And by the way, Steve A, my friend in the States, is correcting me. He says that Mythbusters have proved that you can actually polish a turd.
Well, listen, I'm here at this house because my daughter's just got a new puppy, and we're here trying to help her house train it while she's working. My wife's here, so she's looking after it most of the time, but I've had too much contact with them in the last few days to even consider polishing them.
Aye, that's right. Aye, that's the trouble with dogs. You know, they just leave it for you to deal with, and they never ever grow out of that. It's not like kids, right? Reb Mordecai is in. Reb, I have to say, you in Patreon, you shared an amazing document. I didn't get a chance to read it. It was significantly long, 50-odd pages, where you'd gone deep dive, Reb, and produced a Google document and shared it inside my Patreon. Reb, with your permission, we could maybe talk. I would like that to PDF that and maybe share it with the community. Let me know what you think. I've only glanced through it. I just had a look at the depth that you've gone into there. Let me know how that's come about, how you've made that document, and if you're interested in sharing. I don't know if it's something that you envisage sharing, but Reb is saying that Clynelish 14, and Reb would know this, Clynelish 14 is 60% refill sherry casks and 40% refill bourbon casks. And the profile of that 14-year-old Clynelish, that fits as well. 60 Hertz is saying, I have a Kuboken here, finished in Moscatel and stout barrels. I know exactly the one you're talking about. He's saying, I can't pick those barrels in the spirit, which supports what Graham is saying. When I was in Frankfurt, I did a Kuboken tasting with, can't remember the gentleman's name. Was it Nigel?
Oh, yes, Nigel Robinson, yeah.
Yes, Nigel, and he had the Kubokens, but he also gave us the stout and the Moscatel and the Chochu as well to sit alongside the spirit. And then you were able to at least convince your brain, which is all that matters, that you could pick out those connections and flavours. Andrew Butler is in. Andrew, good to see you. The Mythbusters cheated. They polished something that had previously been a turd, but no longer was when they polished it. So there you go. You can only polish a turd under certain circumstances, we're discovering. Jimmy Leck is saying, isn't inferior just a matter of opinion? Unless the whiskey has gone off, which is surely possible, depending on the state of the cask and other issues, yeah, maybe. Couldn't adding that inferior whiskey to some marriage actually make a whiskey better?
Possibility, yeah. Can't argue.
I mean, I think there are very few cases where whiskey has just poured down the sink, right? There's always something that can be done with it. And Red Mordecai is saying, the link I sent you is a PDF file. Excellent. It was just in Google Docs, so it's a PDF already. Reb, let's have a wee chat to see what you can do about it there. There's one final thing before we skip on to some fun. We'll maybe play a wee game of Visit a Speyside, Graham, together, and then we'll get into the quiz as well, because I think you depending on time, it's getting a wee bit late. We're at 2 hours now. I appreciate you hanging out with us, but if you want to stay for the quiz, you can. But there's one more question I've got. You've had that cask. It's done its job. It's spent. But we have this other thing. And maybe it's the Scots thing again. I've been frugal and kind of not wasting anything and upcycling. But we can rejuvenate casks. Now, whether that's De-char, Re-char, or STR, or I know STR was something championed by Jim Swan back in the day and things, still very much used and celebrated now. Is that happening you've got a cooperage on site at Tomatin as well, we should mention, which is really quite interesting. A fabulous time talking to the guys up there. Very few cooperages on distillery sites in modern Scotch landscape. Loch Lomond is another one, and some others. But you have one there at Tomatin. Are you rejuvenating casks? And tell us what that involves and what your opinion is of it.
We don't do it ourselves in our own cooperage. We don't have the facilities to do it. But we do use De-char, Re-char casks, yeah. I think they are good in as much as if you look at a cask, if you take a stave out of a cask and you look at it, the spirit, the colour that's coming from like a sherry cask or bourbon or anything else, it goes in, I'll use an old measure, about 1/4 of an inch. Yep. Which means that if you take likes of an
6 millimeters for the Europeans watching.
So that the rest of the wood has never been used. You know, so it's sitting there, it's creating a container to hold the spirit, but it's only the inner sort of 1/4 of an inch, 6 mil, that is actually used in the maturation. So if you take like say ex-bourbon casks that have been used, let's say 3 times, they're starting to get a bit tired. And what you can do then is actually take that cask, take the end out of it, and scrape. We used to do it with wire brush, scrape all the inside off, but it's now actually done with much more precision, using blades that will actually shave the inside of that cask off round about the 6 mil, the 1/4 inch. So you then get to newer, fresher wood again. Now that wood's going to be slightly dried out anyway, but what you can then do is char the inside of the cask once again, create those caramelized sugars and such like. Now, it's never going to be the same as a first fill ex-bourbon cask or even a virgin oak cask.
Because there's going to be next to nothing of the previous incumbent.
Yeah, there's nothing less to the previous incumbent at all. But it's not even going to be like a virgin oak cask because the wood has still been there for probably 30, 40, 50 years. You know, so there'll be a lot of the oils and such like will have disappeared from the wood that may have added character to it. At the same time, you will get a bit of colour and a bit of flavour, a bit of character coming out of that. So that we will then use that in, it would be highly unusual to do a single cask bottling from a De-char, Re-char cask. You could do it because there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that bit different. But we can use that in some of our recipes for some of the core range, maybe say the 12-year-old. You know, we can add in some of the De-char, Re-char in that. And by doing it, it means that you may get 1 life or you may squeeze 2 out of a De-char, Re-char cask. So instead of going to be burnt or made into flower pots after 4 lives, you may squeeze 5 or maybe 6 out of it. And to a certain extent, that makes them more sustainable. It's, you know, the environment we live in now is all about being environmentally friendly. You know, so only using casks once, it's a lot of oak trees that would be chopped down to satisfy all the spirits and wines industry around the world that use casks. And if we only used them once, the same as they do for bourbon, it would take a hell of a lot of trees to achieve that. So by using them 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 6 times by De-char, Re-char at some point, it means that casks give you more lifespan. Need less oak casks overall. The forests then get more of a chance to regrow. So I'm putting my green hat here on and saying I think it's a good thing. And the quality of spirit, the quality of whiskey that they can produce is actually pretty good as well. So it's a sort of win-win situation. So I'm all.
There's a brand new distillery in London called Bimber, and one of their releases is a Re-char, so exclusively from a Re-char cask. So it's quite an interesting. And to be honest, it was out of the two standard Bimbers I've tried, from the Ex-bourbon to the Re-char, I slightly preferred the Re-char. It was there was much more richness and spice. There was much more kind of bold, jagged kind of flavors in it. The Ex-bourbon was good, but I enjoyed my time with the Re-char. So it is possible for you to treat it as its own thing. Lots of people in the chat, by the way, Graham, calling on this the title of tonight's vPub to be renamed "You Can Polish a Turd" or you Can't Polish a Turd. Jimmy, like saying, if I wander around Orkney, am I likely to get picked up by a distiller as well? You dream, Blair. The first thing you need to do, Blair, is get your backside over to Scotland, and then we can fathom out if we can get you to Orkney. Very few Scots actually make the pilgrimage to Orkney, I would have to say. It's not the easiest spot to get to. Mark Slinger is in. Good to see you, Mark. I want the old Tomatin casks for making Adirondack chairs. Absolutely, yeah. They have to be totally spent by that time. I'm looking, I'd like something in the vPub. I'd like some kind of barrel themed thing, maybe at some point in the future. Graham Fraser is saying, does any Tomatin spirit whiskey get shipped to Japan these days? A bit like the Ben Nevis arrangement. You do ship to Japan, yep.
Yeah, I mean, we sell, Japan's quite a big market for us, so we sell a single malt Tomatin over there. It's sold.
I think he's talking about maybe the new make or under contract by the owners.
Well,
you
can't actually ship single malt out with Scotland. Single malt has to be bottled in Scotland. So yes, we do actually send blended whiskies in bulk to Japan, but not the Tomatin single malt. The single malt has to be bottled. It has to be made, matured, and bottled in Scotland.
Well, if you're sending it bulk to Japan, you can still do it, but you just can't sell it as Scotch.
Well, yeah, you can't sell it.
I'm quite happy to sell it as a Japanese, a blended Japanese product, for example, or something like that.
Do that. That's Scotch whiskey,
yeah. So it's molasses and Andrew Pearce calling for the name change of the vPub tonight. 60 Hertz in New Zealand is saying STR will become more important if light whiskey in the US continues to rise in popularity. Absolutely true. If the bourbon, ex-bourbon supply chain starts to weaken on us and we struggle to get those casks, we're going to have to be typically innovative. You're absolutely right, my friend. Ralphie just republished a video on the cooperage of Tomatin. Everyone can get access to it through Whiskey Experts on YouTube. I saw Ralphie doing an extras. I've actually got some video footage of both the cooperage at Tomatin and the cooperage at Loch Lomond. And at Loch Lomond, they do have the equipment in place to do this, the shaving. Although, is it wire brush? No, I think it's the brush system. They put it in and the thing comes down and it's over very quickly. It's quite a brutal and fast process.
Yeah.
Excellent, Doc. Thanks for sharing that. And Jimmy, like I say, no wonder they don't go to Orkney. Too great a chance of a broken leg and not realizing your future career as a joiner, a footballer, or an electronics design engineer, or perhaps even an architect. Graham, I'm very happy that you ended up making whiskey, my friend. And I'm more than happy that you joined us tonight to talk about this fascinating subject. I'll take any other questions that you've got that I might have been missing from the lounge before we kind of move on to a wee bit of fun at the end, before we let Graham off hire and relax a wee bit as he's down at his daughter's house. You're actually living outside your window is Glenkinchie Distillery, right?
Yeah.
You've got a son working at Tomatin and a daughter working for Diageo. So whiskey is now, it's in the blood now.
Firmly in the family blood now, yeah. So it's, well, I'm delighted because despite two broken legs, I wouldn't swap anything in my life. It's a fantastic industry to work in. So many great people that you get a chance to meet all over the world, but especially within the whiskey industry itself. Like it's fantastic. One of the friendliest we ever worked with.
I have to agree. It's really wonderful to hear you say that, Graham, as well. To hear that the folk in the industry feel that they have a privileged place and they love. I feel I'm not in the industry, as you know. I'm purely an enthusiast, but I feel that people appreciate that about whiskey. They know that it's a fine, fine place to be. And the community as well, when we gather inside under the canopy of whiskey or under the wing of whiskey, it's almost like it encourages us to be better versions of ourselves. It's a nice privileged place to be and a wonderful product. Red Mordecai is saying, absolutely. Israeli winery tried to bring single malt in and bottle it in Israel, but they found out they couldn't call it single malt whiskey. Absolutely. And Michael Fine-Herrera saying, oh no, sorry, it was Loch Lomond Cooperage. I can understand the confusion. It was actually the thumbnail. I saw the guy's face and I was sure it was the Loch Lomond guy that Ralphie had shared, and it was. Is Graham thinking about adopting a 50-year-old? There you go, Graham. I know you've got 2 grown-up kids in the industry, but Jimmy Legg is willing to come over from Nova Scotia and Canada and be your new adoptee. There you go. Orange Wheel Rule is in. Good to see you. Great chat tonight. Graham has been one of my favourite guests to date, but I'm a sucker for the Arcadian lilt. So Rule Chisholm, I think Rule is up in the northeast. He's up kind of Aberdeenshire, but he's obviously got an ear, and I can hear it as well. I do enjoy the Highland accent as well. I don't know if I'd be able to tell the difference between the different islands up there, Graham.
Shetland's completely different to Orkney.
But to a Glaswegian's ear, I'm not so sure.
They speak strangely up in Shetland. Arcadian, that's the best way to speak English.
Arcadian is the best place to speak English. Fantastic. I hope that everybody's been able to understand both me and myself and Graham quite clearly tonight, because I think the chat has been, I'm speaking as a whiskey enthusiast, as a whiskey geek myself, it's been absolutely fascinating. I love it. And Chris Banks Wildlife, I noticed, Chris, you asked this before, will Graham move back to Orkney?
I doubt it. I've got my parents, my sister, lots of family and friends still live up there, but my kids now live on the Scottish mainland. So no, my wife's from Edinburgh originally, although she was more upset about leaving Orkney when we moved to Glendronach than I was. But no, I doubt if I'll move back to Orkney, but I still like to get back at least a couple of weeks in the summer every year to get some golf in and a few fantastic restaurants up there to go out for meals, and maybe the odd pub comes into the equation as well. But no, I like to get back there, but I don't think I'll ever move back there to live.
Is it Orkney that's famous for its oysters? Or am I thinking, is there some kind of shellfish? Is it not? No.
I mean, Orkney's famous for shellfish.
Because of the Scapa Flow, right, with the fishing and the...
Yeah, Scapa Flow, the biggest natural harbour in the northern hemisphere, as far as I'm aware. Yeah. There's tremendous, archaeology up there. It's farming and fishing originally was the mainstay of Orkney life, but it's been the centre. It's been the centre of the universe for thousands of years. Skara Brae is older than the pyramids of Giza, for instance. So it's there's been a civilization there for a long while.
That's the ancient stones, and I have to. There's so many places that now that I'm interested in whiskey. It's amazing how it's made me so much more interested in the land that I live in as well. So I need to make the effort to get up to Orkney too. Richard Agnew is saying summer in Orkney. Russ Flood, fantastic to see you in here, Thomas. Always thought Acadian were in Louisiana. No, it's Orcadian. Saying, I know it's traditional for distilleries to have a mascot dog, but I'm willing to fill the role. We'll shake and howl for a dram, is Graham looking for a 30-year-old pup. I'm worried, Eric, that when you do come and visit us here in Scotland and spend a bit of time letting it get under your skin, you might not want to go home. You'll need to bring Renee with you to make sure that both of you end up staying here. Yash Desai is in and saying Skara Brae is fantastic. Ryan Sutherland is saying, I don't think I've jumped back on the ferry to Thursday without a sore head. And Jimmy Legg is saying, I'd like to buy a ticket to the next Orkney Shetland Derby. And Graham Fraser is saying, so what does Graham think is the best Arcadian whiskey?
Scapa. That's where I started, obviously. Although, to be fair,
I have to say, Scapa is one of the enthusiasts' eternal frustrations with Pernod Ricard. Give us a natural, give us a pure, the wonderful, wonderful whiskey that's made there. And it's just kind of, so occasionally we might happen across it. But as a single malt, it's very difficult to find, right? Yeah.
But to be fair, Highland Park is actually a very good whiskey because it was obviously founded by my namesake, Magnus Eunson.
That's right. Yes.
He didn't leave it to me in his will, or I would have been a lot happier about it. But
that's right. Back in the day, I don't know if it's in your day, but before that, when Scapa was on its knees, it was kept alive by people from Highland Park making the trip across Kirkwall to run the distillery and keep the systems going. Is that true?
Yeah, that was in the 1990s. So just after I left, it would be. I left in end of '93, early '94. It would be about '96, I think, that a lot of the staff who worked at Scapa actually transferred up to Highland Park, and then a few of them came back down to restart production on a small scale. In the summer, when Highland Park was shut down for silent season, they would run Scapa instead, just to build up some stocks again. Although it's completely separate now, and there's separate
Sure.
staff. But yeah, that did actually happen.
But
But
you hear these kind of symbiotic stories all across the Scotch whisky landscape, almost ambivalent to who the parent companies are, right?
yeah, who cares? Yeah.
That's right. Helping each other out, you're all in it together kind of thing, making the best that you can. I know it's a romantic outlook, but you can either choose to be positive or you can choose to be negative. And it's fine to be proved wrong in either direction. Welsh Toro's in as well. Good to see you, Welsh. And look at Christina Van Ness is in as well. We once knew Christina Zarpoli, but of course she's Christina Van Ness now. Christina, it's wonderful to welcome you in tonight. And Richard Agnew's saying, Scapa, HP, friendship and cooperation, love the generosity. And Reb is saying, I still have 2 bottles of Scapa 14. I know exactly the label in the bottle you're talking about. It was one of my first ever malt whiskies given to me by, ironically, one of my most passionate whiskey friends. He didn't like whiskey at the time. He did a homer, get given a bottle of Scapa 14 and said, Roy, I don't like whiskey. You can have this. Now, what he would do to get that Scapa 14 back from me, right?
Absolutely.
And actually, there was a 40% Scapa 16 that followed that was also an amazing dram. Talk about 40% whiskies being watered down and diluted. This was wonderful whiskey. Quite amazing. Graham, going to put you in the spot. I gave you a quick 1 minute rundown of what is it a Speyside is and said, are you up for it? And you said, aye. And I think in the background you ran off and grabbed yourself a core range expression.
Mm-hmm.
So we can play a wee game of this with 250 folks still into the fun and games at the end. Anybody that doesn't know what this is about, these are glass toppers. They can only be won on the show, the sniper coins. And I've got 10 questions. I'm handicapped right now. I'm down to 9 questions. I have to only use 9 questions. And I can ask Graham anything I want to try and determine what it is, but he can only answer yes or no. You can play along in the chat, and anybody, and since it's Graham that's participating tonight, the top 2 who answer correctly, whether it's before or after I guess, grabs himself a sniper coin. And I might even send a wee sniper coin to Graham just to say thanks, as well as I send along these drams. Let's give it a wee go, Graham. Are you up for it? Yes?
Yeah, surely.
Now remember, you're only allowed to say yes or no.
Yeah.
I do have my phone on hand. I've got a 3-minute timer as well. Let's see how we can do with this one. Timer, 3 minutes. Okay, we'll get it down to 9. You're not allowed to say it's a core range, single malt. Yes?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And all you need to know who the parent company is, geographically, roughly where it is. You need to know the ABV, the age and things, and that's how I'm going to whittle it down to work out what it is. I'll start the timer now, and I'm going to ask, Graham, is it a Speyside?
Yes.
Oh, it is a Speyside. Is it owned by one of the big 4? By the big 4, we mean Edrington, Grants, Diageo, or Pernod Ricard?
Yes.
Oh, it is owned by one of those. Speyside, okay, we're in Diageo territory. Is it owned by Diageo?
Yes.
Oh, I'm getting lots of positives. Does it have an age statement, Graham?
Yes. Yep.
Is it 12 years or younger?
Yes.
Is it 40% ABV? Sorry, let me ask that a different way. No, I'm going to just ask. Is it 40% ABV?
No.
Oh, could be 43. Okay, I've got lost a wee bit. Diageo Speyside Distilleries. It's core range, so we're like Cardew, we're in Cragganmore, both 40%, I believe, is Cardew, maybe 43. Where else are we in Speyside for Diageo? Standard releases Glen Elgin. Is it 43%, Graham?
Yes.
Okay. Is it a Glen?
No. I may have misled you by saying it's a core range, because I'm not 100% sure if it actually would be described as that.
Oh.
Which is maybe
so we could be in flora and fauna territory here. Oh, okay. Let's. It's 43%, so that fits with flora and fauna. Could be Strathmill, Glen Spey. Oh my goodness, Manic Moor. There's 100 things it could be. Now I'm in trouble. It's not a Glen, so it can't be Glen Spey. Flora and fauna. Oh, we think it's so. It's not Dillion. That would be 16, 12 years or younger. Is it Strathmill?
No.
Right, I've got one more. I'm on my hurley here. This is one more guess. Okay, I'll just guess Manic Moor.
Nope.
Oh no, you got me, Graham. I bet you it is a flora and fauna as well. What do we have? What do we have? Oh no, it's not flora and fauna.
Nope.
Knock 12, that's one I've used myself. And I think I may have won with Knock 12. Oh, wow. Well done, Graham. You got me on the ropes and out. 43% Knock Do. Hugely popular in Spain. Very difficult to happen across in the UK and Scotland, Knock Do. But there you go. No, sorry, not Knock Do. Nakandu. Nakandu.
Yeah.
Saying Knock Do. I'm getting confused with Anok. It's Nakandu.
Yeah.
Let's see if anybody got that in the chat. Excellent. Well done. Well played. It is core range, by the way. Absolutely.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether it was core range.
Misleading me. You were not misleading me. And then you said, oh, is this core range? Then suddenly I went to flora and fauna.
I wasn't sure if it was core range and available particularly much in the UK. I had to steal it out of my daughter's collection.
Superb, and she doesn't mind you stealing it, I'm sure. Falsgraf is saying, got him, and deservedly. So it's a popular win tonight, Graham. And yes. Not one got it before the reveal, says P-Dram. That was an inspired and a brilliant one to bring along. So it's looking like it's going to be Rob. Rob is saying, Rob Too Slow is saying it's easy. Stewie Baby said Nakandu 12. P-Dram said Nakandu 12. I don't know if they were the two first. If those guys were the two first, but they looks like could be in with a shout of getting themselves a sniper coin. Well done, my friend. Well done, Graham. Wee bit annoyed. Drat. I should have. I'm maybe getting a bit rusty. I'm maybe taking it a wee bit too for granted. I was doing well for a while.
You were
a losing streak.
Almost almost took a Dillion. Almost took a Cardew, in fact, as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's slightly more obscure.
Ended up all over the place. Ended up nowhere close, but that's fine. That's okay. It means that more folk end up with a wee coin. Brilliant stuff. Graham, I know I'm going to ask or invite you, if you'd like to stay for the quiz at the end. We always go through 10 questions that are multiple choice at the end. Of course, if I have a guest on, there tends to be a few on-theme questions thrown in there as well. But it's very late. How are you feeling?
Oh, I'm happy to say it. No
Excellent. A typical Arcadian. And for the quiz, I've poured something that was a gift to me by a colleague of yours, actually. I helped him out with some technology earlier in the year. And the Scott sent me down that as a thank you. He's a star. He's a good guy. I have to say, you've got one of the most candid, talented, open, honest, friendly, and knowledgeable, passionate brand ambassadors working for you in Scott Adamson. He's a terrific guy.
Stop asking for a pay rise soon if you keep going with that. So, no.
No, it's me asking for a pay rise for him. And then he can afford to send me some more Tomatin Decades. But Graham, thank you so much for your insight and the time that you've spent with us tonight. Cheers to you.
Sláinte.
Sláinte, I can't find a rare. Saying Nakandu early on, but without the 12. ONG, I think that probably counts. There's no others it can be. It can only be the 12. Stevie is saying, is there more than one Knockandu? No, that's not true. There's a 21. £80 will get you a Knockandu 21, one of the best values as we discovered recently, again at 43%. Owen, you've got yourself a sniper coin. That's good enough for me, my friend. So you're down. So I'll say Owen G. And it was P-Dram and somebody else that I'm hoping that my moderators can... Stewie Baby. I think he's had one before as well for the sniper coin. Excellent stuff. Okay, let's get this quiz on the go. It's quite a long vPub again, but it's okay. It's a vPub and it's lockdown. We've got nowhere else to go, Graham, right? Like always, this is a multiple choice. You only share your score if you want to. You're only playing against yourself. I will try and interact with the chat as much as I can through the quiz tonight, but I'll try and play through at a good pace. I did pass this across to my friend McCallum Finer Rare the Doc for some scrutiny beforehand, and he tonight rated the quiz at the end. There's a potential that you'll get 10 out of 10 tonight if you've been paying attention. He's confident that for the attentive tonight, if we picked up most of the subjects, I'm sure we did, there's a good chance that some of you will get a 10 out of 10 tonight. Good luck to everybody. Let's roll into the quiz and ask, which element of the modern Tomatin branding is connected with tonight's topic? Nice easy one to start. Is that A, a Cooper, B, a Mighty Oak, or C, a Hogshead? Graham, I'll ask you to stay quiet. I can tell that you're well, I hope that you know the answer to this one.
It might be one, yeah.
Yes. You might have to guess some of the ones later on, but this one I'm pretty confident you know. And the Onji is saying, thanks, Roy Owen, you're very welcome. And Magic is saying, Magic Lisak, he's saying, now he is Polish, but I think he's in the UK. We had a brief exchange in a chat. Thank you for helping me how to pronounce your name. You said that if I said Magic, then you'd be okay with that. What a vPub. Love to learn all that. Thank you, Roy and Graham. We'll catch up on the quiz tomorrow. Thank you for joining us again, Magic, my friend, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. Wonderful stuff. Everybody is confident about this one. And if I don't even need to hold the bottle up. I've got something here. Tell us what the answer is, Graham.
It's the Hogshead.
Absolutely. Tomatin uses the Hogshead. Here we have it here. And I know that I'm on a wee window right now, but you might just see it up above the M and the A right in the center there. Yeah. You see the wee Hogshead on theme for tonight for sure. Almost everybody in the lounge got that one right to start with. Question 2. In 1994, Graham Eunson joined which distillery as a brewer? Now, I'm suddenly doubting that I've got the year right, but I'm talking about the migration from Orkney to the mainland to become a brewer. Is the year right or wrong?
Yes, the year is correct.
Okay, excellent. Did he join A, Glendronach, B, Benriach, or C, Glenglassaugh? You might notice some connections there, all Brown-Forman distilleries in the modern times.
Yeah.
But back in the day, they were absolutely not when Graham was there. But he moved from Scapa to this distillery in 1994 as a brewer. Which one? I'm starting you off nice and comfortable, nice and easy. The lounge, the very knowledgeable folk that we have, Graham, they're really, really up on their whiskey knowledge. It's hard to catch them out, but we'll start off with a couple of comfortable ones. Where did you head to in 1994, Graham?
On the 10th of January, it was 1994, I started at Glendronach.
So Graham is so far on full points. 2 out of 2 for Graham. Might start to get a wee bit more tricky. Question 3, which distillery is currently installing their experimental lighthouse project to enable innovation? Now, we're not talking about maturation here, we're talking about innovation of this at the spirit level. This is a separate still house, almost like a separate, I was going to say mini distillery, but I think it's capable of doing something like 1 million litres a year or something. But which distillery are we talking about? Is that happening at A, Glenfiddich, B, Glenlivet, or C, Glenmorangie? Where is the lighthouse project happening? Don't answer, Graham. Do you think you know this one?
I think I know that one as well, yeah.
You know that one. I would expect nothing. Are you lulling us into a sense of security? Yash is asking. Is that my MO? Is that my form? I don't think so, Yash. I hope not. I hope that it's going to be a positive quiz for most folk. But expect some banana skins and expect what's come to be known as some asshat questions before the quiz is out. Absolutely nearly everybody is guessing. What would you guess, Graham?
I would guess it's where the old cooperage used to be at Glenmorangie.
Absolutely. One of your haunts, Glenmorangie as well, a distillery you've worked for previously. Now they've got a separate wash and spirit still doing capable of doing up to, if they wanted 1 million litres a year, I'd whole distillery really, just to play, just to try and move away from that kind of core, consistent standard. And it makes absolute sense based on what we've been talking about tonight, that handshake between the spirit to the cask, why they would want to do that. Yeast, fermentation times, barley strains, all of it. It's one that is going to be interesting to see what happens. Question 4, Springbank's twice yearly 12-year-old cask strength release added a little something different to the cask mix in late 2020. This is going to get a bit crunchy now. This is one for the real geeks. What did they do? Typically, bourbon and sherry matured. I hope I'm not giving anything away. But late 2020, which I think would have been the 21st batch 21 from Springbank for the 12-year-old cask strength, did they add some A, port, B, Burgundy, or C, port and Burgundy? Be guessing now, Graham, I think.
I would be guessing now, yeah.
No, there's no problem in that. But it's typically, Springbank 12 cask strength is typically a mix of bourbon and sherry casks. You can discover through a wee bit of internet sleuthing and what the makeup is going to be over time. But this was quite an interesting one that came out at the end of last year. This is splitting the crowd. There's a lot of guessing going on here. Maybe some people are going to be a wee bit annoyed at me for this one. Graham, give us your best guess if you like, my friend.
I would go C, port and Burgundy.
You would be absolutely correct. That's exactly correct. That's what they did. For that release, 45% sherry, 25% bourbon, 25% Burgundy, and just a wee bit of port. Now, I'm going to make the assumption based on tonight's discussion that would be tawny port.
Could be either or.
Russell Whiskey managed a 4 out of 4. Dram Experience 4 out of 4. Steve Atkiss, Ross Fudd, Hell's Wid, Ronald Stew Baby, Tim Hallett. Listen, loads and loads of you still on 4 out of 4. So I didn't manage to fox you on that one. Question 5 is always a picture. I'm going to ask you to focus on this image here. Have a wee look at that sea of casks there. I don't know how many. I don't even know. Those look like hoggies, do they? Are they hogsheads, do you think?
Barrels.
They're just barrels? Okay, wonderful. That's the eagle eye there. Now, I know that you know what distillery we're looking at, but I'm going to ask the lounge what we're looking at. Are we looking at Glenmorangie, Old Pulteney, or Dalmore? All in the Highlands, all north of Inverness. Quite a bit further north of where Graham usually is working. But are we looking at Glenmorangie, Old Pulteney, or Dalmore? Your contentment and your smile, I can tell you you're comfortable with this one, despite the slightly different angle here that this photo is taken from, kind of looking up the slope here.
Yeah.
It's not an angle I'd seen it from before. Welsh Toro is saying, that is my back garden. How dare you? You wish, Welsh. I know you wish. Jimmy Legg is saying, can't answer C, so A. Oh, that's Jimmy having a wee dig. And Greg's Whiskey Guy is saying, I was there. Okay, no doubt. And he's screaming from the rooftops. What is it, Graham?
It is actually a view from down towards the bottom of where is number 3, looking at the end of Alice's cottage, and in the background, the big building is the Stillhouse at Glenmorangie.
Absolutely. Now, the wee clue for those of you who might have been paying attention is that orange and black sign on the warehouse there. Most of the signage, to recall the giraffe livery, the giraffes of Glenmorangie, they use orange and black signage, and you can see a wee orange and black sign there on the... Is that a warehouse? It is, isn't it?
No, that's not. That's actually the bottom, but the big door on the end there used to be the tractor shed, but that building was actually the cooperage.
Ah, so there you go. I assumed it was a warehouse, a wee old warehouse, but no. Tractor shed come coopering shed.
It was the cooperage, and we converted it into the filling store while I was there, but it's no longer either. Now that's where the lighthouse project's being built, or has been built.
Ah, that's where they're building the lighthouse project.
Yeah,
I'm glad you're here.
Next to the Stillhouse.
Superb, absolutely superb.
That's actually a reasonably old photo, I would say, that one.
I think it is quite old. I got this, you can see I put the credit down there, Novo Magazine, this photo. The reason I liked it was obviously we're on topic tonight talking about Glenmorangie and your career, Graham, but the sea of casks seemed to fit tonight as well. I just liked that image, that kind of perspective there with those casks going off into the distance. Lots and lots of 5 out of 5s. People still on a full score halfway through. Brilliant stuff. It's not proven too much of a challenge so far tonight. Question 6. Once Scotland's largest malt distillery in the 70s, Tomatin ran 23 stills to make 12 million litres per annum. But how many stills are installed today? A, 4, B, 8, or C, 12? So 23, that's interesting because there couldn't have been a balance going on there, one wash to one spirit. There would have been some kind of crazy mix or a bunch of bizarre things going on all over the place, right?
Yeah, it was 12 wash stills and 11 spirit stills. But it wasn't a balanced equation at all back then. It was just as soon as you had enough wash ready to go into a wash still, fill it. As soon as you had enough low wines and spirit, low wines and faints, get the spirit still up and running. You know, so it was creating a huge volume back in those days.
Steve A is gambling that you might know this. And Greg's Whiskey Guide is saying, oh my God, they lost quite some. Now, we have to remember that Tomatin ended up in administration in the 1980s and was bought in order to keep it alive. It's quite amazing that Tomatin still exists today and able to carve its own furrow as a single malt. I was speaking to Graham recently, and your theoretical capacity is still high, 5 million or something, but much less than it was. But you're actually running much less than that, right?
Yeah. Well, we're running. It depends each year, but like this year, we're going to be about 1.7 million. Maybe not even quite. We'll be nearer 1.6 million, in fact.
And how much as a percentage will be for single malt's sake?
That will be over 1 million litres will be single malt. Small amount of Kubokan in that, but the rest then will be traded with other reciprocal deals to get their malts and grains in. And some will be
so it's over 1 million litres you're making at Tomatin in order to sell as a Tomatin branded product as single malt, either as Tomatin or Kubokan.
Yep.
And when you joined in 2011, what would that have been roughly?
We would probably been, well, we would be making more. We were making about 2.6 million back then, if I remember correctly. But of that, about probably the 0.6, about 600,000 litres. Maybe 650,000 litres would have been for the single malt.
Fantastic. Long may it continue. Love it. Andrew Pierce is saying, Aquavite, I need to correct the fact I have never tried a single Tomatin. If you like wine finishes, I would recommend the 14-year-old Portwood, absolutely. Have you discontinued your 15?
It's still available in duty-free, if I remember correctly.
Okay, I've not seen it around recently. There's the 18-year-old is excellent. The 12-year-old is always solid. But really, if you're looking for something that's spirit-driven, bizarrely good value for money, and can sometimes punch above its weight, like I say, it's often surprised some of my more experienced tasters and things who have actually decided that they really quite like it. So that's the Tomatin Legacy, or depending on where you're in the UK, Andrew, but if you're in the States, it's Dualchus, right?
That's right.
Anyway, this is C12. I wasn't going to ask Graham to. That is right, Graham, isn't it?
Well, it's 12, of which we only use 10.
Ah, there you go. But you do have. Well, that's actually interesting that a word that are installed rather than in use, right? Yes. I think I might have modified that and changed it since the doc seen it. I think I might have changed it from in use to installed just in case. Falscraft is saying, my first Tomatin recently was a special 11-year-old for my favourite online provider. Okay, so that was maybe an exclusive 11-year-old that was done for somebody. Are you still there, Graham?
Yeah, you're breaking up on me slightly, so I didn't catch all that. But
you dropped out a wee bit. I hope it's just a wee glitch. You're back again. You're back. Question 7. Ralphie broke cover this week and appeared in a collaboration on a video podcast run by Jeremy and Rob from, I'm sure that Graham will be guessing this one. If you know this one, I will be impressed. Are Jeremy and Robin A, Toronto, B, Montreal, or C, Vancouver? Valsgraf is saying Germany. No, definitely Canada, but where? Whiskey Wookie is saying, oh no, I was doubting myself and got it wrong. Don't worry about it, Whiskey Wookie. We all do the second guessing thing. Some people are shouting this. Whiskey Throttle is saying GTA, actually. I'm not going to say that. Do you want to make a guess at this? It is a pure guess, isn't it?
It's going to be a guess, but I would guess Toronto.
You're on 7 out of 7, Graham. You're strolling the quiz tonight. And I know that they're themed around you, your career, your current position and things, but still there's been a couple of potential banana skins in there. So if you answered A, Jeremy and Rob are both from Toronto. What I'm going to do for everyone just now is drop in that link, actually, and I hope that you go along and spend a wee bit of time on Rob's channel or Jeremy's channel, depending on which one you're subscribed to. Their podcast is available everywhere that you would normally get your podcasts from. But they also released, as a video podcast, they also release on their individual channels, which is Sipper Social Club on YouTube, or Rob Whiskey in the Six on YouTube. But I'll put a link in here for Ralphie's appearance of that podcast. So you can copy and paste that into your browser, take it away, and I'll drop it in there and put it in the description box as well a bit later. So you can see that rare appearance from our friend in the GOAT, the original YouTuber, if you like, Ralphie. Great fun it was too. Question 8. There's a wee shot actually there. You can see Jeremy concentrating, Rob having the time of his life, and Ralphie, it looks like in that shot, he's in mid-rant. Absolutely. Question 8. Bit of a banana skin in whiskey. If American oak is Quercus alba and European oak is Quercus robur, what is Scottish oak? A, Quercus alba, B, Quercus robur, or C, Quercus bicolor? I'm not going to say too much about this, just in case it is my predicted banana skin. I would like to think I would get this right if I was asking it, but I fear not. I think I discovered this by researching and looking up things for tonight. Too Slow Rob is throwing the ass hat emoji at me and the banana skin. Yes, Rob, you're probably right. Some guessing. And Greg in France, Greg's Whiskey Guide in France is asking, WTF is 3 Quercus bicolor? Well, Greg, let's see what you're answering. Do you know this, Graham?
Not really, no. I have seen Scottish oak cask, but I couldn't actually have told you the Latin name for them. But I would guess that B, since, well, having said that, after Brexit, maybe not.
Well, it was in my mind. It was in my mind, and when we're talking about that whole thing, can I just say that absolutely you're right. You're spot on. Quercus robur. It's the Scottish oak. English oak is still not exclusively, but generally speaking in whiskey, it's still Quercus robur. It's still European oak, despite the best efforts of Brexit. It is still European oak. The banana skin here was that it's a wee bit of a tricky question because we don't really think about things like that. But obviously, Alba is Gaelic for Scotland, so there was a wee bit of a potential banana skin in there. And bicolor is a North American strain of swamp oak, I believe. Quercus bicolor. I don't know if it's used in the drinks industry at all. I don't know if it's used for coopering at all. It was a random oak species that I picked.
I know that Glenmorangie did do some swamp oak casks back in the past. So whether that was involved or not, I don't know. It was just
now you say that, yes. I wonder if that was that very one. And I just randomly picked that because I like the name bicolor, but there you go. Now you say swamp oak, that does ring a very familiar bell. So if you answered B, give yourself the point. We go on to the second from last question. Graham Eunson is famously harbouring his dream cask in Warehouse 6. We've since discovered that there's more than one, but cask 32 seems to be the one that you need to steal. It's a 1976 vintage filled into what? A refill, B, a puncheon, or C, a sherry hogshead? Like Doc said, there was a chance of a 10 out of 10 tonight if for the folk who were attentive. We know we discussed this at length. I've heard you talking about this cask on other streams, the Tomatin stream, the softer sessions that you were doing with Scott and things. I've heard you talking about this cask in the past, and every time I consider it or hear it, I'm like, oh, what kind of whiskey does it take to make Graham Eunson excited? Whiskey Wookie is suggesting C. He's gone against the crowd along with Siakis, Era McFault, and Watchman. Now, there is going to be potentially some complaints, but I will argue it. Graham, what would you answer?
It is actually a refill, but it is a refill hogshead, and it could well have been in its past at some point a sherry hogshead, but it's definitely a refill. It's not a first fill sherry hoggie.
When you said that earlier tonight, my heart beat a minor skip because I thought about this. I said, I've put a sherry hogshead in the thing and that thing at the end. But you specifically said it's a refill cask.
Yeah, it's the refill factor that makes it so special because it's not overwhelmed with being, decades in a sherry cask.
Absolutely. So people like Era and a few other guys out there are going to be shouting at me saying, no, I'm taking the point. If you want to take the point for a sherry hogshead, absolutely be my guest. It's absolutely fine. But strictly speaking, the terminology you would use for the cask that is maturing in is a refill cask.
Yep.
Let's see how the scoring is going. Is there anybody with a chance of a 10 out of 10 tonight? Come on, there's got to be. Helen's on 9 out of 9. Fantastic. How's Andy tonight, Helen? I hope he's well. Russell Whiskey on 9 out of 9. Let's scroll down. Jesse voicing. Jesse, so good to see you. Impossible first perfect score comes down to the ass hat. Unfortunately, Jesse, it does. I would like to say it's going to be easy, but no. Graham Young is on 9 out of 9 as well. Brilliant, Graham, as well as Mark Slinger. Any other 9 out of 9s I can see just as the chat jumps? I'm scanning to see. There's got to be Andrew Butler. Andrew, fantastic. I sent you a wee email this week, my friend. I hope you got that email. If you didn't, let me know. 9 out of 9, 9 out of 9, 9 out of 9. I'm not seeing everyone. The chat is moving. Any other 9 out of 9s? Good luck, everybody. McAllen, Fine and Rare. 5 or so 9 out of 9s. Aye, there's going to be a 10 out of 10 tonight. Come on. Last question. It is an asshat question. We are expecting another Scotch single malt inaugural, specifically look at that word, inaugural release. So we're not talking about anything coming from Campbelltown, which is imminent as well. We're talking about a new single malt in Scotland, an inaugural release to drop in the UK and Europe this week. From where? This is the asshat question. You don't think it's going to be that easy. A, 100,000 litre LPA distillery. B, a 500,000 litre LPA distillery. Or C, a 1.2 million litre LPA distillery. You all know what inaugural release, or many of you are going to know what inaugural release is dropping in the next few days. But I'm asking you, what size, what scale of distillery is it coming from? 100,000 litres per annum, 500,000 or 1.2 million. What size of new distillery are we talking about here? Have you any guess at all? Could this be your first fumble? Could they ask that question catch out at the end, Graham? Or do you think you might know this? Don't give us the answer yet.
I think I have an idea.
You're guessing. Okay, the asshat emoji is absolutely filling the chat right now. I'm getting them thrown at me right and left. People complaining. Graham Young, Rob too slow. Falscraft saying, damn it. Whiskey Woody, Wookie, sorry. Yash Desai, everybody's a wee bit annoyed. Jimmy Legacy and Aquaviti, no one likes you. Come on, there's a 1 in 3 chance of getting it right. Doc said there was at least 5 of you looking at a 9 out of 9 tonight. Graham, give us a guess. Will you get a full house?
I would go for C.
A friendship destroyed. It's B. It's Torravec on the Isle of Skye. They're bringing out their inaugural release in the next few days, and their capacity, whether they're using it or not right now, their capacity in terms of scales of distillery is a 500,000 litre site. I'm sorry, Graham. I feel really bad. By all these people screaming at their own screens, and I don't hear it, but literally you I've taken the rug from under your feet.
I've even been there and visited it.
You've seen it. You've been there and seen it.
Yeah.
It's coming out at around about £50. Not a bad price for an inaugural. Honestly speaking, I hope that the run out with that size of distillery is big enough for us all to get our hands on it. I hope there's not going to be a fight over this. £50, 46% ABV, natural presentation. Excited about it. Well done, Torevec. We know it's going to be 3 years old. He started running Spirit in 2017. That's okay. We're just keen to get our hands on it and try it and see what the future holds from that distillery in Skye. Graham, apologies, my friend. I know that I've kind of you were so looking like you might have got a 10 out of 10, but that's what the asshat thing is all about. It's to add a bit of fun in there as well. So it's not just to consider, oh, there's a new whiskey coming out, but what's the likelihood of another and another? How big is this distillery? How much is it producing? How big is it in relation to its neighbour Talisker? Anything like this, it's intended to pique a wee bit of curiosity. That's how I defend my asshat questions every week, by the way, Graham. But there we go. Let's see if anybody managed a 10 out of 10. Helen got a 10 out of 10. She's celebrating and using the 10 out of 10 emoji. Congratulations, Helen and Andy. Well done on your 10 out of 10 tonight. Let's see if anybody else. Orange Wheel got a 9. Almost there, Orange Wheel. Lots of Jimmy Jazz, Chris Pollack, Peter Box, all on 8. Lassie Hjort Otsman, good to see you, all in 9 out of 10, as well as Fraser Thistle, both on 9. Jesse got 10 out of 10 for the first time ever. Just such a ha-ha, Jesse. Congratulations. Well done to you. You must have been so relieved on that last one there. It is possible. Graham Young is on 10 out of 10 as well as I got Helen's one there as well. If I'm missing anyone, Andrew Pears, well done to the 10 out of 10ers. I absolutely echo that. Watchman is saying, is that 3 Isle of Skye distilleries now? Raasay, Talisker, and well, Raasay is a separate island in its own right. So no, it's separate. It's in the locality, I guess, but it's a separate. It's not on Skye. But they were doing a wee tour. They were doing a boat tour in a collaboration with Diageo, Torevec, and Isle of Raasay, and they were running a tour back in the before times when we could actually do tours. They were doing that very thing. And Doc is saying Mark, Jesse, Helen, Graham, and Graham at 10, I think. Doc, thanks so much for running shotgun with me again tonight. I know that Steve A has been in tonight helping me out, as well as Gregor, as well as all the fantastic moderators I have to keep the chat running smoothly and to keep it clean and polite. But it always is anyway. It's wonderful to have you all hanging out here. Please raise a wee glass with me and thanking my friend Graham Eunson for coming along and spending so much time with us tonight. Way more than I expected him to be here, but I thoroughly enjoyed talking about our topic tonight, Graham. I absolutely loved it, my friend. Andrew Butler is saying, me too. Andrew's saying he got a 10 out of 10 as well. Congratulations, Andrew. Rob is saying, thanks, Roy and Graham. Rob, too slow. It's always wonderful to have you in, my friend. Thank you so much. McCann Rare is saying, aye, and Andrew. And Malt Minion Chuck Metzger is saying, fantastic cask conversation, using the emojis to give me that description. I gave everybody a brand new emoji tonight to use in the chat. It's a cask, a barrel and fitting for tonight. Wonderful stuff. Really enjoyable tonight, Graham Fraser is saying. Gino is saying, thanks, Graham Eunson, for a great evening. Cheers. Everyone is saying, great show. Thanks, Graham. Fair winds and following seas. Thanks, everyone. Great to see you. And thanks to you too as well. Gino, Aaron McFaul saying, thanks, Roy. Thanks, Graham. Great guest. Wonderful vPub again. I've had a blast. It's easy for me when I've got a guest. And of course, next week, actually, I will have a guest next week, but we're going to be talking about something that is completely different. Talking about the idea that there's always more whiskey. There's millions of whiskey out there. We don't need to get too uptight about chasing bottles right, left, and centre. There's millions of whiskey. So we'll be talking about lots of dynamics connected closely and loosely to that with Matt Mackay from the Dramble, a fantastic guy with a great blog out there, the Dramble, wonderfully thoughtful and insightful stuff he's writing. I reached out to Matt to ask him to join me to talk about these concepts, and he's coming along next week. I'm looking forward to that. The vPubs are pretty much fixed for February, more or less, and even into the first week in March. It's busy around these parts. I hope you're enjoying it. Graham, can we raise a wee glass?
Absolutely.
Can I say thank you so much, my friend, for bringing all the candid, open, honest insight to bring your experience onto the vPub for everybody to access. I know that tonight wasn't all about you talking about the latest whatever it is from Tomatin and the core range and things, but it's maybe sometimes nice for you to be able to talk a wee bit about you, your experiences and things that you're clearly passionate about.
No, it's always good to talk about whiskey. Doesn't matter what the whiskey is, just talking about whiskey is always good fun.
I fully agree with you, my friend. I really do. Hang about in the background, won't you? Don't disappear, and I'll come in and have a wee debrief with you after the stream finishes. Graham Eunson, thank you so much, my friend. Slanchiva to you.
Slanchiva. Take care.
Wonderful session tonight. Really enjoyed it. I'm going to go back and watch it on the replay, probably just to pick up so much of the wee insights and things that Graham shared. Gino is saying thanks to you. Always a great time to spend with you and all the barflies. Gino, thank you so much, my friend. You too. Ben Demon Hunt is saying Slanchiva to you as well, Ben. Thanks for doing this again, my friend. James Morgan is saying, do you have any tasting notes on the Tomatin decades too? I haven't been concentrating on it fully. It's quite a sweet whiskey. A wee bit savoury in there. It's 46% ABV, this one, I think. 46%. And it says, all it says on the front here is knowledge statement. Decades is a mix of many, many casks over the 5 decades of Tomatin's production. So it goes back into, I think, the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and in the 2000, the teens, the last decade as well. So over the course of 5 decades, I believe I should have asked Graham about that while he was here. It says American and European oak casks on the label is all the information I get. I'm very much enjoying this wee drama of it tonight. Peter Bucks saying great vPub. Stu Baby saying great chat tonight with Graham. Looking forward to my sniper coin. Well done to you, Stevie. Catch you next week. Sweet drams. Thank you very much. One Glassman Warner. So good to see you. Cheers, everybody. Slancheroy. Wonderful. I caught you in tonight, my friend. I hope you're keeping well. I hope Warner Jr. is doing well as well. Eric is saying, what a great treat tonight. Excellent work from both of you, and thank you for the dedicated moderators. I echo your sentiments. Eric, thank you so much. Bruno Martins is saying, good night, barflies. See you all next week. Bruno, great, I caught you in. Thank you. Chris Pollack is saying, great vPub. And Ronald is saying, again, for tonight, thanks. And Graham, too. Fantastic. So good to see you in, Ronald, my friend. Brandon Rodriguez is saying, amazing vPub as always. Polishing turds, you learn something new every day. Lol. Thank you, you wonderful, beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies. Had another wonderful time tonight as well. I know it went on far too late. I think we're going to knock on for 3 hours, my goodness. But it's fine, it's the vPub. I'll try and put timestamps in for you to watch easily on the replay. And I'll raise you all a glass to everybody for hanging out with me so late tonight as well. I hope you had fun. And I look forward to welcoming you all again for another session a week from tonight for next Thursday's vPub. And until then, you're very dearly loved. Slanchiva.